Hidden within the sprawling deserts and winding rivers of North America, deep canyons hold secrets that defy explanation. From cliffs that seem to swallow hikers whole to reflections that vanish as mysteriously as they appear, these landscapes are filled with enigmas that have puzzled explorers, rangers, and locals alike. In this journey through the country's most puzzling gorges and slot canyons, we will trace the paths of vanished prospectors, lost climbers, and unexplained phenomena, following the faint traces left behind by those who dared enter. Shadows bend strangely along limestone walls, whispers echo between narrow passages, and objects appear in places no one can reach. Step carefully, observe closely, and allow the canyon's hidden stories to unfold, revealing mysteries that linger in the silence and depth of the rock, waiting for answers that may never come. The Vanishing at Copperhead Gorge. A narrow band of pale sandstone rose like a broken spine through the desert wastes, its walls bleached by sun and etched by centuries of wind and flash floods. This was Copperhead Gorge, where the sandstone flutes pinched in and out, where carved curves trapped sunlight on ledges and dropped cold shadows over slick rock slabs. The story of the vanishing, the disappearance of a lone backpacker within those twisting corridors, became whispered among desert rangers and canyon guides. The missing person left no name in any official public bulletin, just ragged footprints fading on the dust, and yet the tale persisted, growing in layers as the desert dust settled and storms swept it away again. Copperhead Gorge sits geologically where eroded layers of Navajo sandstone shift to deeper, older layers of Glen Canyon formation. The rock there shows the telltale crossbedding and ripple marks of ancient dunes, now hardened into smooth, sweeping walls that curve inward to form hidden amphitheatres and narrow chutes. In dry seasons, the canyon floor is sun-blazed and cracked, but after even a modest rainfall many miles upstream, the gorge transforms. Suddenly the walls echo with thunderous roar, and a surge of water pushes through, reshaping the sand, burying previous footprints, and smoothing over every trace of human passage. Locals respect Copperhead Gorge because they know it, not for its grand vistas or easy access, but for the fragile danger you cannot always see coming. The backpacker whose disappearance became legend reportedly entered the gorge just as daylight waned. According to hearsay among guides, she carried a map and radio, had a basic understanding of desert travel, yet she was ill-equipped for night navigation through shifting sandstone corridors. Those who later walked the path she is said to have taken noted oddities. In places the walls seemed to close in more than the map suggested. The floor dipped into shallow depressions filled with fine dust that swallowed boot prints, and pockets of chilled air gathered in shadowed niches, even under starlight. Some claimed that their compass spun wildly in the narrowest bends. Others swore that, in utter silence, no wind, no rustle of lizard, no distant bird call, the canyon felt alive as though it watched. Search teams arrived the next morning. They combed the gorge floor under a sky turning harsh at noon, canvassed the ledges by headlamp at night, and called in helicopters to sweep above where light couldn't reach. They fanned outward into the desert scrub, scouring washes and dry arroyos, yet found nothing but scattered sagebrush, a water-stained pack fragment near a boulder, and footprints dissolving into shifting dust. The Glen Canyon formation walls yielded no traces of footprints on their smooth terraces. Rock too sheer, no handholds, no sign of passage. At the edge of the main corridor, where a narrow ramp dropped into a shallow pool of clear water, the pack fragment rested damp around its seams, as though soaked in a single flash flood. But no bones, no clothing, no sign of a fall or struggle. Season after season, guides returned with hikers to rewalk the route under different light and weather conditions. On clear days, the canyon glowed warm amber. At dusk, the walls deepened to rust and purple, shadows seeping down like ink. After winter rains, the canyon floor worked like quicksand, sand layers shifting inches beneath boot soles, swallowing prints as quickly as they appeared. Some searching parties said they heard distant clinks against stone, perhaps falling rock, perhaps a loose buckle from the lost backpack. Others described unsettling silence, broken only by dripping water deep inside gullies where no rain had fallen. But nothing else emerged. The canyon refused to give up its secret. Ancient traces of human presence do exist upstream from where the backpacker vanished. There are sheltered alcoves with faint petroglyphs, abstract swirls and long faded stick figures carved in dark desert varnish. Local indigenous groups regard them as old trail markers, warnings about seasonal floods and hidden pitfalls. Some modern guides treat those markers as cautionary signs. When the sandstone whispers, they say, "Respect it." But none of these signs points directly to the fate of the missing hiker. They only deepen the sense that Copperhead Gorge has been a place of quiet warning for far longer than any single visitor. Environmental hazards are real. Flash floods are a constant danger. In one documented season, a sudden rainfall upstream poured into narrow tributaries that converge into Copperhead Gorge, sending walls of water surging through confined chutes. Rocks fell under the pressurized flow, large slabs shifting or detaching, sometimes creating new caves, sometimes collapsing old ledges. After the waters receded, sediment covered former trails entirely. In canyon country like this, even experienced hikers use rope and rappel gear, mindful that dry-looking washes can turn into death troughs. Yet the missing backpacker carried nothing more than standard hiking gear. No rope, no climbing equipment, no safety harness. If she slipped into one of the deeper fissures opened by flood loosening or attempted to climb a slick wall, escape would have been nearly impossible. Over the years, the story of the vanishing has gathered embellishments. Some say a sudden flash of light, too bright, too steady, lit the interior of the gorge at midnight, long after any storm had passed. Others claim a phantom echo of a human voice, faint but clear, carrying through the canyon when no one else was near. Those accounts are never corroborated, always muted by uncertainty, and yet they persist in hushed campfire conversations among guides who choose not to return after sunset. What remains now are sparse physical artifacts, a partially waterlogged map, its ink blurred, a faded backpack patch snagged on a sandstone edge, the pack fragment raised from the shallow pool that still stains damp after rain. Rangers preserve these items locked away in an evidence cabinet, but no formal public report links them definitively to a person. The desert around Copperhead Gorge keeps no registry of who walks its washes. Locals refer only to the woman who disappeared. No name, no age, no date. And still the canyon draws curious hikers. They come with headlamps, GPS, ropes, and determination. They crouch by candlelight to trace ancient petroglyph lines. They photograph the wash patterns in the sand, the smooth curves of the walls, the narrow choke points carved by wind and water over millennia. Some spend the night at the rim, watching the stars slide across the canyon floor, listening for any unnatural sound. None claims to find a resolution. Some return shaken, others simply never speak again of the canyon. Over time, the mystery has settled into the hard sandstone of Copperhead Gorge. It resists explanation. Maps remain incomplete. Small side fissures shift with rockfall and erosion, erasing old passages and creating new ones. The geology of the place betrays no rhyme or reason when it comes to human movement. Cracked walls offer no holds, hidden plunge pools swallow evidence, and shifting sand restores solitude as soon as humans step away. The gorge stands indifferent. Its layered walls catch the light at dusk and glimmer with desert varnish. At dawn, the floor glows soft pink and dust drifts in still air. Rain brings sudden deep silence broken only by slow drips in dark recesses. Wind sweeps through with a soft hiss, carrying the spices of sage and dry earth. It offers beauty, and with that beauty danger. Some believe the missing hiker walked into darkness willingly, drawn by something beyond warning. Others suspect canyon mechanics, rockfall, floods, collapse, claimed her without a trace. A few hold haunted theories, echoes not of the canyon, but of something older, tied to whispers in the petroglyph grooves. At night, some hikers swear they see a faint light deep within the gorge, flickering across the far wall for a breath and then gone. The echo riddle of Antelope Canyon. Antelope Canyon carved its narrow corridors through the red Navajo sandstone, yet it was not the twisting walls alone that drew attention, but the strange echoes that seemed to return words in shapes no human voice could form. Guides and hikers alike have marvelled at how a shout thrown into the slot could come back altered, sometimes reversed, sometimes layered with faint harmonics that suggested the canyon itself was speaking. The canyon is located near Page, Arizona, and is divided into the popular upper and lower sections, each with corridors that narrow to only a few feet, curving in ways that make orientation nearly impossible for those unfamiliar with the labyrinthine paths. The walls are polished by centuries of wind and flash floods, giving them a smooth, almost liquid texture that shimmers under the desert sun, while the floor alternates between compacted sand and scattered stones that crunch underfoot, amplifying the acoustics of every step. The canyon's walls rise in smooth, flowing curves, cross-bedded layers revealing ancient dunes pressed into stone, channels so tight that sunlight barely touches the floor, and sound bends in unexpected ways. Light filters through narrow openings above, forming beams that slice across dust motes and highlight the subtle striations in the rock, yet sound seems to travel differently than light. A whisper or call sent from the base of a bend often returns from an unseen corner, sometimes delayed, sometimes almost immediate, carrying nuances that suggest distance or source that do not align with physical reality. The geological formations themselves, layers of Navajo sandstone compacted over millions of years and later carved by erosion, create natural amphitheatres that are both beautiful and disorienting, contributing to the canyon's reputation for enigmatic sound phenomena. Visitors have described their own shouts bouncing back distorted, syllables stretched or reversed, and laughter that emerges from corners where no one could hide. Some recount that casual conversation suddenly echoes as if multiple voices answer simultaneously, forming words that seem like responses rather than repetitions. Photographs and recordings rarely capture the full effect, and yet first-hand accounts are consistent enough to suggest a pattern. Certain spots along the canyon floor and bends in the walls produce distinct acoustic anomalies. Those who wander alone often report a rising sense of unease, as if the canyon reacts to their presence, returning not only sound but a reflection of expectation, tension, or curiosity embedded in the human voice itself. Geologists note that the slot canyon's narrow passages, sudden bends, and concave alcoves create natural acoustic chambers, yet even specialists are puzzled when echoes appear to answer questions before they're finished. Sound waves reflect off polished walls and overlap with subsequent reflections, producing complex interference patterns. Yet measurements of frequency, amplitude, and resonance cannot fully explain why some sounds appear to stretch or shrink in time, or why certain low-frequency tones return with a richness not predicted by classical models. Acousticians have pointed out that the canyon's layered structure and uneven surfaces can create focal points for sound, amplifying some waves while cancelling others, but there remains no satisfactory explanation for the perceptual effects reported by visitors. For centuries, the Navajo regarded the canyon as a living entity, believing that voices carried by the rock could convey messages from ancestors or spirits, and some stories speak of travelers lost after hearing a call they could not resist. Oral tradition emphasizes respect for the canyon and its unpredictable character, warning that one should not enter without proper guidance or understanding of its hidden paths. Guides recount elders' teachings about spirit echoes and caution that repeated calls into the slot may bring responses that are more than mere sound. While these accounts are folkloric, they resonate with the repeated human experience of auditory anomalies that modern science struggles to fully explain, blending cultural memory with natural phenomena. Seasonal flash floods sweep through the canyon in minutes, rearranging sand and smoothing footprints, and sudden temperature drops can bend sound in unpredictable ways, amplifying the canyon's enigmatic effects. Even small rainfall upstream produces torrents that thunder through narrow chutes, sculpting new channels, eroding previous floors, and shifting loose stones. The cooled air during nights or early mornings refracts sound differently than the hot midday desert air, causing some echoes to arrive faster or slower than expected, or to seem to originate from impossible directions. These environmental variables add to the uncertainty, making Antelope Canyon a place where perception is never static and each visit can produce a subtly different auditory landscape. Guides who lead visitors through the narrow corridors report that positioning, posture, and even the pitch of one's voice dramatically alter the echoes, sometimes producing tones that seem almost melodic or eerily articulate. Visitors seated or crouching may hear distinct responses compared to those standing upright, while speaking softly or loudly shifts the echo's clarity. Tour groups note moments when conversation is mirrored in ways that feel deliberate, a question echoed with an almost understandable answer. Even seasoned guides admit they cannot always predict when or where these occurrences will happen, and they often caution newcomers to pay attention to subtle changes in the wall's curves, the angle of sunlight, and the canyon's ambient temperature. Despite careful study, no one has definitively explained why certain shouts, whispers, or footsteps return warped in ways that defy normal acoustic principles, leaving both scientists and tourists in quiet astonishment. Field recordings show anomalies, but the canyon's complexity, its turns, overhangs, and vertical alcoves, makes precise modelling nearly impossible. Researchers and enthusiasts continue to experiment with controlled sound tests, yet every attempt to replicate the answers reported by visitors falls short. The phenomenon remains a blend of documented physical principles, human perception, and the canyon's enduring unpredictability. When the canyon falls completely silent, some swear the walls carry back murmurs that belong neither to wind, water, nor human tongue. The ghost camps of Black Ridge Canyon. A thin wind cuts across the sun-baked ridges, carrying the scent of dry earth and juniper, and in the quiet of the desert, the remnants of human activity stand out in strange relief. Black Ridge Canyon, carved into rugged sandstone over millennia, has become known among hikers and rangers for its unexplained ghost camps, which appear fully formed yet utterly abandoned. The first hints of this mystery came when a lone ranger on a routine survey noticed a neatly pitched tent tucked into a narrow wash, its canvas taut and unmarked by footprints beyond the immediate vicinity. Nearby, a fire pit had been cleared, and a small pack rested neatly beside it, as if its owner had vanished mid-step. No tracks led toward the site, and none led away, leaving the ranger with an uneasy sense that something had passed through the canyon in silence, leaving only careful traces for others to stumble upon. Jagged cliffs rise above narrow washes, their surfaces polished by centuries of wind and occasional flash floods. Scattered creosote bushes and juniper saplings cling stubbornly to the canyon floor, providing intermittent shade that shifts across the sand as the sun arcs overhead. Shallow alcoves and eroded depressions hint at natural water collection during rare rains, yet some depressions seem almost deliberately arranged, suggesting that human hands might have occasionally shaped them. The interplay of light and shadow along the canyon walls gives the landscape a shifting, almost surreal quality, where every rock and crevice seems to conceal possibilities both natural and inexplicable. The first camp was discovered on a late afternoon hike, when the ranger noticed a tent standing alone beside a dry wash. Within Black Ridge Canyon, the fire pit was cold but cleared. A neatly folded pack rested nearby, and no tracks led in or out, leaving the observer unsettled and curious. Small details, a pair of gloves carefully stacked, a water bottle balanced upright, hinted at human precision, yet the absence of a living presence made the scene profoundly unsettling. Photographs captured the physical evidence, but they could not convey the eerie stillness that pervaded the wash, or the sensation that the canyon itself was watching the intruder. Over the following months, more camps appeared in the canyon, each maintaining the same meticulous arrangement, as if the area had been used recently, and yet no human presence had ever been recorded. In one narrow alcove, a tent was pitched with a sleeping mat neatly rolled beside it, and a small lantern set at its centre. In another, a miniature cooking area appeared with utensils aligned precisely, the sand around them undisturbed by footprints. Rangers and hikers began documenting these repeated patterns, noting the uncanny regularity and consistency of the sites. The mystery deepened with each discovery, suggesting some unseen force orchestrating these camps with exacting care. Investigators catalogued each discovery, examining footprints, disturbed soil, and potential animal activity, but nothing offered a concrete explanation. In Black Ridge Canyon, every attempt to trace a source ended in empty washes and echoing silence. Even surveillance cameras and GPS tracking in some areas yielded no signs of human passage. Experts considered wind, shifting sand, and local wildlife as potential contributors, yet none could account for tents fully erected, supplies neatly organised, and the unmistakable sense of deliberate arrangement. Each investigation concluded with a combination of curiosity and unease, the canyon retaining its secrets despite human scrutiny. Flash floods sweep the canyon floor unpredictably, shifting sand, rolling rocks, and sometimes erasing all traces of passage. Yet even after violent storms, some camps appeared intact, leaving the impression that forces beyond ordinary erosion or wind had orchestrated their arrangement. Seasonal shifts in temperature and sudden gusts of wind could bend the light and cast shadows across the sand, but the precision of the arrangements remained inexplicable. Observers noted that small details, a backpack propped at an angle, a water bottle untouched by debris, consistently defied any purely natural explanation, adding weight to the impression that these sites were deliberately placed yet abandoned. Journals from early explorers mentioned sightings of isolated tents and small, cleared spaces in remote washes, often attributed to travellers who had passed by long before. Black Ridge Canyon features in indigenous oral histories as a place where spirits and desert guardians might leave signs for those who enter, blending tradition with the uncanny. Some tales speak of travellers who encountered clearings or arrangements that seemed intentionally prepared but were never inhabited. Though modern rangers treat such accounts cautiously, the convergence of historical observation and current phenomena lends an added layer of intrigue to the canyon's ghostly reputation. Those who stumble upon a ghost camp often describe a disorienting calm, a sense of being observed without presence, and a quiet tension that grows as they explore the surrounding ridges. Some describe the feeling of walking through a space recently occupied yet untouched, where the air seems heavier, the shadows deeper, and the sound of wind carries a resonance that is almost conversational. In Black Ridge Canyon, the isolation and silence magnify these perceptions, and even experienced hikers admit to a lingering unease, as though the canyon itself were reminding them of its incomprehensible rules. No definitive explanation has satisfied investigators. Fully equipped camps, arranged as if recently used, continue to appear with no occupants or tracks. Black Ridge Canyon guards its secret, leaving both scientists and casual explorers to puzzle over the invisible presence that seems to move through the washes. The combination of natural desert processes, historical accounts, and modern observations forms a patchwork of mystery that defies conventional explanation. Researchers continue to monitor the canyon, hikers continue to report new camps, and the landscape endures as a silent witness to patterns that hint at human or supernatural activity without revealing its source. Whenever the desert wind moves silently through the abandoned tents, some swear it carries whispers of travellers who were never truly there. The Lost Guide of Zion's Left Fork. A sudden gust of wind stirred the narrow corridor, carrying the scent of wet sandstone and desert dust, as the group carefully picked their way along slick stone. Zion's Left Fork had long been admired for its twisting walls and hidden pools, yet it was here that a seasoned guide would vanish without warning, leaving companions staring into a maze of rock and shadow. The sun hung low, and the canyon walls, streaked with red and ochre, reflected a muted light that barely illuminated the wash below. Each step required precision, balancing on smooth stone, and the guide moved with practiced ease, pointing out subtle landmarks that marked the safest path. It was the familiarity of his movements that made the sudden disappearance all the more incomprehensible, as if the canyon itself had absorbed him without leaving a trace. Sunlight barely reaches the canyon floor, bouncing off narrow, polished walls that twist unpredictably, while hidden alcoves and sudden drops conceal pockets of water left by seasonal storms. The sandstone is worn smooth in places and jagged in others, forming natural traps that can surprise even experienced hikers. Small pools collect rainwater, reflecting the sky in miniature mirrors, while narrow fissures twist beneath the overhangs, their depths impossible to gauge without close inspection. Seasonal flash floods carve new channels in minutes, erasing paths and creating illusions of solid ground where sudden dips lurk. For anyone unprepared or distracted, a single misstep could have consequences that vanish as quickly as the guide did. The guide moved confidently, signalling the group to follow narrow ledges and cross shallow water pools with practiced care. Despite years of experience, he paused at one bend, listening to an unusual sound reverberating from deep within the canyon, a hint that the terrain was shifting more than expected. His companions waited silently, watching the subtle changes in light and shadow across the walls, noting how water streaks glimmered in patterns that seemed to shift with the wind. A faint echo returned his calls, warped and elongated, creating the illusion of movement where there was none. In these slot canyons, sound and sight often misled the senses, and familiarity offered little comfort against the canyon's subtle deceptions. An abrupt splash echoed from around a corner, followed by a startled shout that faded almost instantly, leaving the group frozen in the stillness of the canyon. In that moment, the guide seemed to vanish, as if swallowed by the stone walls themselves, with no footprints or evidence to mark his path. Panicked calls returned only the canyon's echo, distorted and unfamiliar. The group retraced their steps cautiously, scanning every pool and crevice. But the passage where he had disappeared was unchanged, unmarked by the evidence of human presence. Their instruments and phones offered no guidance. The GPS signal flickered sporadically, a reminder that even technology bends to the canyon's unpredictable form. Rangers and search teams arrived swiftly, combing every twist and pool, scanning the narrow chutes with flashlights and drones, yet the canyon returned only silence. GPS tracking revealed nothing, and even the most skilled trackers could find no hint of passage. Their careful mapping was reduced to frustration. Helicopters hovered overhead, their rotors stirring wind and dust into the canyon, but no trace of the guide emerged. Rescue teams documented every inch, noting that the canyon's narrow walls and deep fissures made it nearly impossible to maintain continuous observation. Despite all modern tools, the disappearance remained complete, leaving both rescuers and hikers with a profound sense of unease. Left Fork's seasonal water flow shapes the sandstone unpredictably, with flash floods capable of moving sand and rocks in minutes, carving new channels and hiding evidence beneath shallow pools. Observers note that even a brief storm can rearrange the canyon floor, masking tracks and creating illusions of impassable barriers. In addition to sudden floods, fallen rocks and debris from cliff faces can block or obscure routes overnight. While these factors could account for some confusion, the absence of any trace at the moment of disappearance suggests something more perplexing than natural obstacles alone. Previous hikers' journals and ranger reports hint at similar incidents in the Left Fork, where travellers experience sudden disorientation or vanishing companions. Indigenous stories reference treacherous crevices and secret pools, cautioning that the canyon sometimes guards its paths as if aware of those who walk through it. Historical accounts describe travellers misjudging water depth or footing in narrow washes, yet few mention a disappearance so complete that no evidence remains. These accounts, taken alongside modern reports, create a patchwork of observations suggesting that the canyon has long been capable of baffling even those most prepared. The remaining group struggled with disbelief and rising panic, each step measured yet uncertain, as echoes and shadows played tricks on perception. Even seasoned hikers admitted a creeping sense that the canyon itself had altered, folding space and sound in ways that defied expectation. The interplay of light on the walls seemed almost deliberate, revealing angles that disoriented the eye. Small movements, a ripple in a pool, a sudden gust through a narrow passage, magnified tension and lent the canyon a presence that felt watchful. In this isolation, the absence of the guide became more pronounced, the canyon's silence more oppressive. Despite careful reconstruction of the guide's route and repeated searches, no conclusion satisfied investigators. Natural hazards, unseen drop-offs, or sudden flash floods might explain the disappearance, yet the absence of any trace leaves the case unresolved. Zion's Left Fork continues to challenge understanding, its winding walls concealing answers as well as questions. Every rescue attempt, every study of seasonal water flow, every analysis of rock patterns leaves the canyon unchanged, as though it has deliberately withheld the truth from those who seek it. The impossibility of certainty only intensifies the canyon's reputation, a place where even expertise meets limits. In the silent walls of Left Fork, some say the canyon keeps its secrets as carefully as it hides its water beneath the rock. The standing stones of Palo Duro Canyon. The late afternoon sun slanted sharply across the canyon walls, painting the cliffs in hues of deep red and muted gold, while shadows stretched and shifted over the uneven terrain. A dry wind whispered through narrow gullies, carrying the scent of sun-baked sandstone and the faint aroma of desert grasses. Amid the play of light and shadow, a cluster of tall stone monoliths caught the eye, their smooth faces gleaming unnaturally against the rugged backdrop. These formations, arranged with a seeming precision, rise from the canyon floor as if placed deliberately, commanding attention from anyone who happens upon them. It was here, in the vast expanse of Palo Duro Canyon that observers have long puzzled over the origin and purpose of the standing stones, each one an enigma carved from time and silence. Layered cliffs of red and tan sandstone stretch for miles, their edges jagged from centuries of wind and water erosion, while alcoves and crevices create pockets of shadow that shift with the sun's movement. Occasional boulders appear perched precariously along the walls, suggesting collapse yet holding firm against gravity, and every ledge and shelf seems to follow its own irregular rhythm. The canyon floor itself is a mix of sand and gravel, dotted with hardy shrubs and small pools left from seasonal rains, and yet among this rugged natural landscape, the standing stones maintain an almost deliberate geometry. Even from a distance, the formations appear to defy the randomness of nature, their vertical presence striking against the horizontal sweep of the cliffs. A ranger leading a small group of hikers noticed the monoliths while guiding them along a rarely travelled sidewash, pausing to measure the height of one that rose nearly 10 feet above the sand. The stones were arranged in configurations that defied casual explanation, some forming subtle arcs while others aligned along invisible axes, casting long shadows that intersected in unexpected ways. Their surfaces were unusually smooth, with faint grooves and weathering patterns that hinted at both age and careful placement, leaving the observer to wonder whether nature or human hands had been responsible. Several stones had toppled long ago, their fallen companions still lying in alignment, suggesting that the arrangement had once been even more deliberate. Closer inspection revealed an eerie symmetry, with lines of stones that ran parallel to the canyon walls and clusters that suggested ceremonial or navigational design. The spacing between each column was unusually uniform, inconsistent with the randomness of natural rockfall, while some formations seemed to mirror patterns found in other documented indigenous sites across the region. Even small details, like the tilt or orientation of a single stone, appeared intentional, as if designed to mark some unseen coordinate or to capture the light at specific times of day. Researchers noted that when the sun struck certain stones in the late afternoon, elongated shadows crossed the canyon floor in a pattern that could be mistaken for a deliberate calendar or astronomical alignment. Archaeologists note that Native American groups extensively traversed Palo Duro Canyon, leaving behind artifacts, pictographs, and ceremonial mounds that hint at a rich cultural presence. Early settlers documented unusual rock arrangements in journals, occasionally referring to them as mysterious markers or ancient sentinels, though few offered enough detail to ascertain purpose. Some theories suggest the stones may have served as landmarks or signalling posts, while others propose spiritual or astronomical functions. Yet the lack of accompanying artifacts or inscriptions makes it impossible to tie these formations definitively to any known group, leaving their origins shrouded in speculation. According to geologists studying the area, the stone columns are composed of caprock harder than the surrounding sedimentary layers, which may explain their stability over centuries. Weathering patterns suggest exposure for hundreds of years, though precise dating remains difficult in the absence of organic material or inscriptions. Experts debate whether erosion alone could account for the shapes and alignment of the stones, acknowledging that their apparent geometry raises questions that no scientific analysis has yet fully answered. The interplay of natural forces and possible human intent creates a puzzle in which the canyon itself becomes both context and participant. Approaching the stones, many experience a faint unease, amplified by sunlight piercing the canyon walls and throwing long shadows over the sand. The columns appear to shift in the periphery of vision, and the interplay of wind and echo creates a quiet resonance that seems to inhabit the space between the rocks. Some hikers report feeling as if the stones are observing, their towering presence somehow aware of every step, lending an almost living quality to formations that are otherwise entirely inanimate. The canyon's isolation and the quiet of the surrounding terrain heighten this impression, making even the most skeptical observer pause and consider the possibility of a presence beyond human perception. Although studied repeatedly, no single theory explains the origin, arrangement, or purpose of the stones. Whether remnants of ancient ritual, markers for travellers, or extraordinary results of natural erosion, the monoliths retain a power to provoke wonder and uncertainty. Each observer leaves with questions unanswered, and every photograph or sketch captures only a fraction of the impression these stones make upon the imagination. Even among experts, the debate continues, with interpretations ranging from ceremonial alignment to a natural geological quirk, yet no explanation fully accounts for the uniformity and precision observed on site. As the canyon light shifts at dusk, the stones seem to hold a gaze that has watched centuries pass in silence. The floodlights of Buckskin Gulch. Shadows pooled in the narrow canyon walls, deepening as the sun dipped behind distant cliffs, while the air grew cool and still, carrying the faint scent of damp sandstone from recent rains. Amid the twisting slot canyon, a sudden glow appeared on the walls, a luminous shimmer that seemed to pulse with life. Buckskin Gulch had always been known for its dramatic chasms and twisting passageways, yet hikers quickly realized this illumination was unlike anything caused by the sun or moon. The glow spread across the sandstone in irregular bursts, bright and vivid, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only a dim reflection behind. No one could easily explain the source, and those who saw it would long remember the unnatural radiance in the canyon's depths. The canyon itself is a labyrinth of tight passages, with towering walls rising hundreds of feet above a floor strewn with sand, gravel, and occasional boulders left from seasonal flash floods. Water-carved grooves and alcoves catch light in unpredictable ways, bending reflections around corners and creating pockets of shadow that deepen as the day wanes. Echoes ricochet along the walls, carrying the faintest whispers of sound, while the narrowness of the gorge amplifies any movement, making it feel as though the canyon itself is aware of intruders. These features, while natural, seem to lend an almost supernatural quality to any sudden appearance of light within the depths. A solo hiker navigating the narrow wash recounted the first glimpse of the glow, describing a sudden flare along a vertical wall that illuminated dust particles suspended in the air. The light was pale yet vibrant, flickering as though it had a rhythm, then retreating into darkness almost instantly. Shadows cast by the canyon walls stretched across the sand, exaggerating the height of nearby boulders and creating illusions of movement. Even seasoned explorers were startled, unsure whether the illumination originated from a natural source or something altogether stranger. The hiker noted that the glow seemed to linger just long enough to suggest intent, as if it had recognized an observer before retreating into shadow. Over the following years, other hikers and amateur photographers reported similar flashes of light, sometimes following no discernible pattern and appearing at different points along the canyon floor. Some accounts described the glow moving along the walls, while others claimed it emerged in isolated bursts, bright enough to silhouette a climber or fallen tree. Rangers occasionally confirmed these sightings, but could never capture them in a way that fully explained the phenomenon. The light seemed to defy expectation, appearing at dusk, in moonlight, or even during brief daylight filtered through the canyon's twists. Patterns, if any existed, were subtle and inconsistent, leaving each witness with a distinct and personal impression of the display. Studies by geologists reveal that minerals like mica and quartz veins within the sandstone can reflect light in unexpected ways when struck at particular angles, possibly accounting for some observations. Atmospheric conditions such as dust, humidity, or mirages caused by temperature differences may also enhance the brightness or movement of reflected light. Yet none of these explanations fully satisfy those who have seen the lights repeatedly, and scientific attempts to reproduce the effect in controlled conditions have often fallen short. The interplay of geology, climate, and narrow canyon geometry produces phenomena that seem to hover between natural explanation and true mystery. Indigenous tribes in the region, including the Navajo and Paiute, told stories of wandering lights that guided travelers or warned of danger in narrow canyons, though these tales often blended oral history with cautionary instruction. Early settlers' journals mention flashes of light in slot canyons that seemed to appear without a source, though descriptions were often dismissed as exaggeration or misperception. Modern guides and park staff acknowledge these stories, noting that folklore continues to shape visitors' expectations and perception of Buckskin Gulch, even as the lights remain largely unexplained. Some hikers have come to believe the illumination is a guardian or messenger of the canyon itself, a vision passed down through centuries of stories and observation. Witnesses to the illumination often describe an intense blend of awe and unease, heightened by the canyon's narrow passages and echoing silence. The sudden brightness can distort perception, making rocks appear larger or shadows stretch unnaturally across the sand. Some hikers describe a sense of being watched or followed as though the canyon itself animates the light, testing their courage or attention. The interplay of isolation, echo, and unexpected illumination heightens tension, leaving an impression that is difficult to shake even after leaving the canyon. It is a phenomenon that lingers in memory, shaping the way visitors move, speak, and react within the shadowed walls. Attempts to photograph or record the lights consistently have met with frustration, as cameras and sensors often fail to capture the vividness seen by the human eye. Explorers who try to track the glow along the walls find it elusive, vanishing, or appearing elsewhere almost unpredictably. Scientists acknowledge that natural reflections or optical phenomena could explain some occurrences, yet the precision, timing, and intensity reported by multiple witnesses remain baffling. Buckskin Gulch, in all its narrow grandeur, continues to harbour the glow as if deliberately shielding its secret, leaving observers in the uneasy balance between explanation and wonder. Sometimes, when the canyon falls utterly silent, the lights flare without warning, as if the walls themselves remember a story no one can read. The Marble Canyon Overlook Enigma. From the edge of the overlook, the Colorado River seemed impossibly small, a ribbon of silver threading between towering walls that refused to fit entirely in the eye's frame. Visitors often felt their sense of distance falter, cliffs appearing closer or farther than reason allowed, while shadows clung to fissures as if reluctant to release their secrets. Marble Canyon, carved over millions of years by relentless water and wind, reveals its enormity gradually, yet even experienced hikers are struck by moments when scale warps perception. It is here, at the precipice, that the human mind encounters the canyon's quiet enigma, uncertain which edges are real and which are illusions. Some pause, gripping the rail or rocks, feeling vertigo brush against awe, unable to reconcile what they see with what they know. For a few, the sense of precariousness is enough to make even the most careful steps tentative, as though the canyon's size and depth subtly challenge the observer's confidence in balance itself. The canyon walls display intricate layers of limestone, sandstone, and shale, each striated band a record of deep time, reflecting sunlight in subtle gradients that shift as the day progresses. Vertical cliffs plunge into the river below, interspersed with hidden alcoves and narrow ledges that can vanish from view depending on the vantage point. The curvature of the gorge bends sound and light in ways that distort perspective, making distances feel inconsistent and depth impossible to gauge accurately. Every detail, from the colour of the rock to the slope of the riverbed, contributes to the sense that the overlook is a space where ordinary perception is suspended. Hikers often remark that familiar landmarks seem to vanish or appear displaced, an effect that deepens as they move along the rim. When the sun hits the walls at low angles, certain alcoves glow faintly in gold and pink, giving the illusion that the rock itself is shifting, a subtle mirage that vanishes when the light changes. Pausing at the canyon's edge, some feel a rush of vertigo, as if the river has moved or the cliffs have slanted beneath them. Some describe momentary illusions of distant ledges floating above the canyon floor, or the sudden impression that walls have narrowed and closed in around them. Even seasoned photographers recount their cameras failing to capture the canyon's immensity, as though the lenses cannot reconcile the depth and angles that the human eye perceives. Each visitor leaves with the unsettling memory of having been simultaneously dwarfed and deceived by the landscape. Trails leading to the overlook sometimes see hikers hesitating mid-step, reluctant to trust either their feet or their eyes. Occasional hikers describe feeling that the river far below is almost unnaturally still, as if time has slowed in the gorge, creating an eerie calm that contrasts sharply with the rush of air and sound above. Marble Canyon has long held spiritual importance for indigenous peoples, who describe it as a place where the land alters perception and challenges those who venture within. Early European explorers documented similar experiences, noting in journals how cliffs appeared to shift and rivers seemed smaller or larger depending on vantage. Even decades later, guides reported hikers refusing to believe their own eyes, insisting the canyon's edges cannot exist as drawn on maps or photographs. The enigma of scale and perspective has haunted observers for centuries, a quiet challenge posed by the Earth itself. Some Navajo accounts speak of the canyon as a place where one's sense of self feels fragile against the enduring rock and water, describing it as a corridor between the seen and unseen, where the land itself teaches humility. The canyon's twisting formation, its stratified walls, and the changing sunlight can together create optical effects, including false horizons, misjudged distances, and delicate mirages, geologists explain. The interplay of shadow, reflection off the river, and the curvature of canyon walls sometimes causes the human eye to perceive vertical cliffs as slanted or river channels as narrower than they are. Yet even with these explanations, scientists acknowledge that perception remains inconsistent and highly subjective, especially when confronted with the canyon's vast dimensions. Visitors' reports of floating ledges, distorted river bends, and warped walls cannot be entirely reduced to explanation, leaving a fertile ground for speculation. Geologists also note that air density and temperature differences between the river and the canyon rim can slightly bend light, creating subtle heat shimmer that further warps perception, though the effect is rarely sufficient to fully account for what observers describe. At the canyon's edge, hikers sometimes sense their scale dissolve into the landscape, a quiet recognition of how brief human existence is compared to the ages of stone. Others feel a subtle unease, as if the canyon is subtly challenging their understanding of space, depth, and the horizon. Sound seems to stretch and echo unpredictably, and the sunlight shifts in ways that make familiar surfaces appear unfamiliar. Each of these experiences reinforces the canyon's reputation as a place that engages the mind as deeply as it impresses the eye. Hikers often report that even a single glance can produce a lasting disorientation, one that lingers well after leaving the rim. Occasional hikers report seeing patterns in shadows that seem almost deliberate, lines and shapes that vanish when looked at directly, leaving the mind to fill in details that were never really there. Even with an understanding of geology, optics, and environmental conditions, observers cannot fully explain the canyon's visual effects, leaving each with a personal enigma. No photograph, no map, no journal can capture the precise way the walls and river interact to warp perception. Marble Canyon remains an active puzzle, a space where human observation is both challenged and humbled by sheer scale and subtle optical deception. Even those who walk the rim repeatedly notice new distortions each time, as if the canyon is testing their attention and resolve. The overlook holds a power over perception that science can describe but never fully contain, a quiet dominion that asserts itself in every step and glance. For a single heartbeat at the overlook, the canyon seems to stretch beyond reason, as if the world itself has folded under the weight of its own vastness. The Whistler of Kings Canyon. A sharp, high-pitched whistle cut through the quiet of the canyon floor, reverberating off cliffs in a way that made its origin impossible to locate. Hikers stepping along a narrow ridge soon realized the sound followed them, moving as if it were aware of their position, vanishing abruptly when approached. Kings Canyon, with its labyrinth of steep walls, forested ravines, and sudden drops, has long been the backdrop for such inexplicable auditory encounters, where wind, water, and rock conspire to distort perception. Even experienced climbers report the sensation that the whistling carries a deliberate rhythm, one that no bird or animal could produce. At times, the sound seems to circle, rising and falling as though dancing along the ridges, creating a dissonance that leaves the mind unsteady. The canyon's sheer walls rise hundreds of feet, carved from granite and schist that reflect and bend sound in unpredictable ways. Narrow slots, hidden alcoves, and uneven rock faces create natural echo chambers, while the river at the base adds a constant undertone of rushing water that can mask or amplify other noises. Sunlight filtering through ridges and sparse foliage creates shifting shadows, while the wind funnels unpredictably through crevices, producing ghostly howls that mingle with natural echoes. Even faint noises, rocks sliding, leaves rustling, or distant bird calls, can be exaggerated into sharp, whistling tones that seem almost purposeful. The canyon's geometry alone produces sounds that the ear struggles to locate, creating the impression that the whistling is alive and mobile. Campers recall the whistling beginning just as dusk settles, soft at first, then rising in a piercing cadence that seems both close and impossibly distant. One backpacker described standing frozen as the sound echoed in a narrow slot canyon then stopping entirely as though the walls themselves had swallowed it. Another recalled multiple overlapping tones, producing an effect that was eerily melodic yet entirely alien. These experiences leave hikers both awed and uneasy, questioning whether the canyon is merely echoing sounds or concealing something far stranger. Some report that the whistling seems aware of human presence, fading when approached and returning when ignored, as though taunting or observing. Stories from indigenous communities speak of voices moving through the canyon walls, understood as guardians or spirits speaking on the breeze. Early European explorers documented similar accounts, noting how their calls were often answered by distant whistling with no discernible source. Journals describe the phenomenon with fascination and fear, emphasizing that the sound sometimes seemed to follow travelers, vanishing when they attempted to approach the cliffs from which it appeared to emerge. Across centuries, Kings Canyon has inspired stories blending natural phenomena with the supernatural, creating a tradition in which the whistling is interpreted both as a caution and a mystery, a sonic presence that seems to test those who enter the gorge. Acousticians point out that thermal gradients, wind channels, and canyon topography can create sounds that seem directional yet are difficult to locate. Certain rock formations act as natural resonators, amplifying faint noises into piercing whistles, while animal calls from birds, bats, or insects occasionally mimic human-like tones. However, reports from hikers frequently include patterns inconsistent with these explanations: sudden disappearances of the sound, tonal variations that defy logic, and apparent interaction with human movement or presence. Instruments capture only fragments of the phenomenon, often failing to reproduce what human ears perceive on sight. Even scientists acknowledge that some experiences cannot be fully explained, leaving a persistent gap between observation and understanding. The whistling is most often reported along specific ridges, narrow slots, or near the river's edge, suggesting a connection between topography and perception. Travelers note that it frequently occurs at twilight, when temperature differences between rock and air are greatest, yet even under similar conditions at other times, the sound may not appear. Some hikers claim the whistling responds to noise or movement, fading when approached and returning when ignored, creating a sense that the canyon itself is conscious of the observer. These inconsistencies make it difficult to determine whether the sound is natural, psychological, or entirely unknown, and every encounter leaves lingering uncertainty. Experiencing the canyon's auditory enigma, many feel a heightened sense of alertness and unease, tempered by awe. Visitors report that prolonged exposure can distort their sense of distance and direction, with cliffs and ridges appearing to shift under the influence of the sound. Even within groups, individuals often perceive the whistling differently. Some hear multiple overlapping tones, while others hear only a single note. The sound, whether real or amplified by perception, creates an invisible presence in the gorge, a force that challenges both expectation and understanding. Many hikers describe a creeping realization that no matter how closely they listen, the canyon holds secrets that cannot be fully grasped. No matter how thoroughly hikers, guides, and scientists have investigated, a definitive source has never been determined. Instruments capture only fragments of sound, often failing to reproduce what human ears perceive on sight. King Canyon remains a theatre for uncertainty, where echoes, wind, wildlife, and human perception intertwine to produce a phenomenon that is partially understood yet ultimately elusive. Every ridge, alcove, and crevice participates in the enigma, amplifying the canyon's power to confound even the most careful observers. The whistling refuses to be pinned down, resisting maps, recordings, and repeated explanations alike. When the whistling rises from the depths at twilight, it carries a sense of intent that no echo, wind, or creature can claim as its own. The Echo Cliffs, Aviator Mystery. A silver monoplane carved a narrow line through the late afternoon sky, its engine humming steadily as it approached the labyrinthine ridges of the canyon. Echo Cliffs rose below, a series of sheer walls that caught sunlight in sharp glints, creating an illusion of depth that seemed to shift with every passing second. The pilot, a seasoned aviator with hundreds of hours over mountainous terrain, adjusted the throttle, mindful of sudden downdrafts that could tug the plane down without warning. Shadows pooled in narrow crevices while bright light reflected off granite faces, producing a disorienting mosaic that tested even experienced eyes. That day, the aircraft's path would vanish from sight within minutes, leaving no trace but the canyon's lingering whispers and an enduring question of fate. Ribbons of wind twisted through the gorges, colliding with cliff faces and producing turbulence that could lift or buffet a light aircraft. Sunlight fractured along jagged ridges, casting both dazzling brilliance and shadowed pockets that concealed the canyon floor. Rising thermals generated unpredictable vertical currents, capable of forcing subtle shifts in altitude that even instruments might not immediately record. Sound carried in strange ways across the canyon's geometry, reflecting engine hums, whistles, and distant echoes in overlapping layers that seemed almost alive. Even on clear afternoons, the combination of wind, rock, and light could produce a sense of movement that had no origin, challenging both perception and navigational skill. The pilot had meticulously filed a flight plan, tracing the canyon rim to observe geological formations, while maintaining a steady altitude above treetops and narrow ledges. Local records note that the aircraft had performed flawlessly on prior surveys, yet the rugged cliffs of Echo Cliffs presented a challenge unlike any flatland flight. Radio communication continued for only a few brief minutes as the plane neared the upper ridges, interrupted by static punctuated by faint, untraceable echoes. Witnesses on distant trails described seeing the silver fuselage tilt ever so slightly, then disappear entirely behind the canyon walls, leaving only the sound of fading engine hums that seemed to linger longer than physics would allow. Climbers descending narrow slots later reported hearing the distant roar of an engine, though the sky above was empty and sunlight revealed no aircraft. Search crews navigating the cliffs observed fleeting glints of metal reflected in steep crevices, only to find nothing upon investigation. Local ranchers spoke of echoes that mimicked mechanical sounds, transforming ordinary wind gusts into what seemed like deliberate communication. The steep terrain, narrow ledges, and shifting light all combined to create an environment where perception and reality blurred. Each failed search added layers to the mystery, leaving the pilot's fate hanging unresolved in the canyon's acoustical maze. Air currents within the canyon could form invisible walls that altered a plane's trajectory in seconds. Narrow gaps between cliffs sometimes produced turbulence strong enough to toss small aircraft, while echoing channels can mask or exaggerate engine noise, making the aircraft seem near or far inconsistently. Acoustic studies reveal that the canyon amplifies sounds from multiple sources, overlaying them into complex patterns indistinguishable to the human ear. Yet none of these natural or technical explanations fully account for reports of rhythmic engine tones that faded and returned in a way that seemed almost intentional. Even experts acknowledged that certain patterns defied conventional reasoning, preserving the story as a blend of science and enigma. Survey teams documented zones along the cliffs where echoes seemed unusually strong, creating pockets in which sound lingered far longer than expected. Hikers reported hearing brief engine whines repeated hours apart, originating from locations that did not match the plane's last observed position. Reflections of sunlight across polished granite sometimes suggested a metallic shape suspended on the cliffs, only to vanish upon closer inspection. Historical records of small aircraft disappearances in similar terrain highlight the dangers of the canyon's combination of wind, light, and acoustics, yet Echo Cliffs seem to add an inexplicable layer of interference. The result was a landscape both beautiful and treacherous, capable of deceiving even the most vigilant observer. A peculiar tension hung in the air for anyone who later traversed the cliffs, as if the canyon itself retained memory of the vanished plane. Faint hums and errant whistles provoked unease, bending perception of distance and direction. Searchers noted moments when shadows and reflections seemed to move independently, creating an illusion that the aircraft had reappeared, only to vanish without explanation. The cliffs seemed to communicate silently through echoes, thermals, and visual distortion, exerting a subtle psychological weight on anyone navigating their paths. Even decades later, hikers spoke of vertigo and disorientation, a sense that the canyon resisted full understanding. Every effort to recover the aircraft ended without definitive results. Ground searches, aerial reconnaissance, and sonar scans produced fragments of data, but no tangible proof of wreckage. Modern technology, including drones and remote sensing, has penetrated areas that human teams could not, yet nothing conclusive has emerged. the canyon continues to amplify natural sounds and distort perceptions, maintaining its reputation as an unforgiving environment where human presence is only partially recorded. Echo Cliffs holds its secrets firmly, leaving questions about the aviator's fate unanswered and sparking speculation among climbers, pilots, and geographers alike. Time has done little to calm the enduring fascination and unease surrounding the site. The pilot's disappearance remains a touchstone for cautionary tales in aviation circles, while hikers tell stories of unexplained echoes and fleeting metallic glints along the ridges. Local guides warn that even decades later, the cliffs produce auditory illusions capable of unnerving the most experienced adventurer. Evidence of human activity is sporadic and nature quickly reclaims any trace, leaving the canyon itself as the only consistent witness. In this environment, observation, imagination, and reality merge, forming a riddle that has yet to be solved. Even decades later, the canyon exhales a sound that hints at a silver plane lost to the cliffs, whispering a secret that refuses to be uncovered. The steps beneath the San Rafael swell. Sunlight fractured across jagged sandstone cliffs, illuminating faint terraces that seemed almost deliberate in their arrangement. Somewhere within this remote section of the San Rafael swell, a series of steps emerged from the rock face, their edges unnaturally straight against the erosion-sculpted cliffs. Hikers navigating the ledges paused, uncertain whether they faced a natural formation or a remnant of some lost effort. The sight left a lingering unease, as if the landscape itself was holding a secret from any who dared approach. Each step appeared both inviting and forbidding, a path carved in mystery rather than necessity. Sedimentary layers stacked over millions of years revealed patterns both mesmerizing and deceptive. Water-carved gullies and wind-sculpted alcoves created corridors that echoed with footsteps, sometimes amplifying the faintest sounds across vast distances. Soft sandstone shifted under careful weight, yet the steps appeared unusually resistant, as if they had been hardened by design rather than time alone. Seasonal rains left dark streaks along the walls, emphasizing the contrast between natural weathering and the steps' rigid lines. In places where erosion had undercut ledges, tiny terraces persisted, defying expectations and drawing explorers closer to the edge of perception. Early 20th century prospectors documented oddstone formations in their journals, though most dismissed them as illusions created by erosion. One report described a miner navigating a narrow ledge who swore he could trace deliberate steps carved into a cliff wall, each aligned with precision that defied his understanding. Modern surveys note only fragmented terraces, yet these accounts persisted in local lore, passed between generations of hikers and explorers who sought the swell's hidden corners. Even the US Geological Survey records mention the terraces as unusual but unverified features in topographical maps, a note of curiosity rather than conclusion. A small team of climbers discovered faint handholds and shallow steps while following an obscure route through the alcoves. They observed the sandstone's reddish glow shifting as light fell differently in narrow corridors, revealing subtle indentations that seemed unnaturally even. Whispers of wind carried sounds strangely amplified, echoing along the vertical walls as if responding to human presence. Each pause for observation heightened tension, the feeling that the steps themselves invited or resisted approach without explanation. Every footfall seemed to awaken an unspoken pattern, as though the cliffs recognized intruders yet offered no guidance. Within the swell, sandstone sometimes fractures in ways that echo human construction, particularly where harder layers withstand erosion longer than the surrounding rock. Temperature fluctuations, frost wedging, and water seepage all contribute to peculiar lines and terraces, though these cannot fully explain the uniformity of certain steps. Comparisons with other canyons show similar anomalies, yet the San Rafael steps remain unique in their alignment and consistency. Researchers debate whether human intervention, prehistoric or otherwise, could have left these marks long before modern documentation, but no consensus has ever been reached. Some steps appear in series, leading nowhere, abruptly ending on sheer drops or disappearing behind overhanging rock. Others seem to align with water channels that no longer flow, suggesting that their purpose, if any, was connected to environmental features long altered. Photographs captured during aerial surveys show shadows cast in ways that exaggerate straight lines, yet ground inspection confirms subtle irregularities that feel deliberate. Minor artifacts, like small cairns or scratched markings, are sometimes found near the terraces, hinting at fleeting human presence without confirming construction. These anomalies fuel speculation, teasing both science and imagination in equal measure. Explorers recount a peculiar tension when stepping onto these terraces, a mix of vertigo, awe, and uncertainty. The regularity of the steps clashes with the chaotic surrounding cliffs, provoking an almost instinctive wariness. Sounds echo in unexpected ways, footsteps amplified or duplicated across the sandstone corridors. Some hikers describe fleeting impressions of movement in peripheral vision, shadows shifting just beyond clear view, reinforcing the sense that the steps themselves are part of a living, watchful environment. Even in silence, the swell conveys a presence that cannot be measured, recorded, or fully understood. Repeated examinations and careful documentation have still failed to reveal the origin of these steps. Drone footage and high-resolution satellite imagery offer only partial views, while physical access is limited by steep ledges and fragile rock. Every expedition raises new questions. Were the steps carved by prehistoric hands, by explorers lost to time, or merely sculpted by wind and water into forms that deceive perception? The ambiguity endures, leaving researchers, hikers, and local storytellers with speculation rather than certainty. Each new observer confronts a landscape that resists explanation, preserving its mystery for generations yet to come. Erosion by time and the elements has shaped the sandstone, yet the steps persist, faintly marking the rock. Occasional hikers leave traces of modern passage, yet no evidence explains why these terraces endure while the surrounding rock collapses or erodes. Seasonal changes shift shadows across ledges, making the steps vanish or reappear depending on the sun's angle, an optical illusion that strengthens their elusive character. Every attempt to catalogue or map the terraces encounters new irregularities, reinforcing the sense that the swell is a puzzle, deliberately hiding its logic from human understanding. Beneath the shifting sunlight of the swell, the steps vanish into shadow, as if guarding a secret no visitor has yet deciphered. The silent tent of Ansa Borrego's slot. A faint glint of nylon caught the edge of vision as a lone hiker threaded through a narrow corridor of sun-baked rock. Deeper into the twisting slot, the structure revealed itself. A small abandoned tent pitched with an almost deliberate precision against the cliff wall. The air inside the canyon remained unnaturally still, carrying no sign of human presence, no footprints leading away or toward the fragile shelter. In the heart of Ansa Borrego Desert, the silence felt almost watchful, as though the slot itself had preserved the tent for a reason beyond understanding. The hiker could not tell if the site was a recent intrusion or a relic left untouched for months, perhaps years. Walls of sandstone rose in layers coloured from deep ochre to pale tan, sunlight slicing between tight vertical shafts and casting shifting patterns on the canyon floor. Erosion had carved smooth curves in some areas and jagged ledges in others, forcing careful navigation and constant awareness. Seasonal flash floods could sweep through the slot without warning, yet the tent remained untouched, seemingly immune to nature's violent rhythm. Dust and sand shifted subtly with the wind, revealing the canyon's intricate microtopography, a natural labyrinth that had trapped more than one visitor in the past. Every turn exposed new formations, each one more imposing than the last. Decades of desert exploration have recorded numerous hazards hidden in the slot canyons of the region, from sudden water torrents to rock falls. Early rangers and surveyors noted strange abandoned campsites tucked into remote alcoves, often disappearing before they could be examined. Folklore among desert hikers mentions objects left behind without explanation, fueling a quiet tension about what can be discovered when the land is mostly empty. Even modern hiking guides warn of isolation, limited cell coverage, and the deceptive distances between canyon entrances, making every discovery in Ansa Borrego feel amplified by solitude and uncertainty. The tent's fabric had dulled from sunlight but retained a taut, unbroken shape, anchored carefully to small ledges of sandstone. Its entrance faced a sliver of light, yet shadows within the slot obscured the interior completely, leaving the hiker guessing at what might have been inside. A scattering of pebbles formed a subtle path to one side, but no footprints marred the surrounding sand. Even the straps and poles seemed meticulously arranged, resisting the natural chaos of wind and gravity. The scene exuded an almost theatrical stillness, the kind that makes a passerby question whether they are witnessing an ordinary campsite or something deliberately staged. Steps toward the tent were cautious, measured, each footfall echoing strangely off the canyon walls. The silence surrounding the hiker amplified every small sound, the brush of fabric, shifting sand, and a distant drip of water. A sense of vertigo mingled with awe, the slot's tight confinement magnifying the mystery of the untouched campsite. Shadows shifted unnaturally as the sun climbed, elongating walls and deepening the isolation. Every pause for inspection heightened the feeling that the desert itself was aware of the intruder's presence, observing without intervention. Slot canyons form over centuries via water and tectonic activity, geologists note, yet nothing in these processes accounts for the tent's precise position and pristine condition. Desert animals might disturb or dismantle such a structure over time, but no signs of disturbance were evident. Hikers noted that even experienced backpackers rarely pitched tents in such inaccessible sections, suggesting the presence was deliberate or impossible. Environmental factors, from sudden floods to wind gusts, are constant, yet the tent remained untouched, defying the logic of natural wear and human reach alike. Subtle irregularities around the tent added to the unease. Sand slightly compacted in unnatural patches, a small stone cairn perched nearby, and shadows that shifted differently than the surrounding rock. Light filtering through the narrow slot exaggerated lines and angles, creating optical illusions that seemed to guide the eye toward the tent. Yet every close inspection failed to reveal evidence of human activity, leaving the observer torn between rational explanation and lingering doubt. These anomalies created the impression of a story deliberately left half-told, a fragment of human presence suspended in an unyielding desert landscape. Multiple visits yielded no answers, and drone footage revealed little beyond the slot's winding corridors and the lone tent. Rangers and desert guides speculate on what could have brought someone to such a remote location and why they left without a trace. Even technological tracking and mapping provide no conclusive explanation, preserving the tent's enigma for those willing to explore deeper. Each hiker who stumbles upon it faces the same question: how could an object so human-made exist in a place that seems untouched, yet entirely accessible to no one? As years slip by, the desert relentlessly reshapes every canyon wall and sand-filled floor. Yet the tent endures, quietly resistant to the passing years, a single reminder of human presence amid vast emptiness. Shadows lengthen and contract across the narrow corridors with the shifting sun, and the faintest wind moves through the slot with a whisper that hints at stories never told. Every observer leaves with new questions, a heightened awareness of isolation, and a sense that the desert itself contains more secrets than it could ever reveal. Deep within Ansa Borrego's slot, the tent sits in silence, as if the desert itself guards the secrets of those who once occupied it. The Fisher Tower's cliff shelf disappearance. A climber froze on a narrow sandstone shelf, listening to the wind tug insistently at the ropes. The jagged pinnacles of Fisher Towers appeared in the distance, casting spires across the desert floor like frozen sentinels. At first, nothing seemed amiss, but a subtle shift in the sand hinted that someone had recently passed this way. Glancing at a neighbouring ledge, the hiker noticed a sudden unnerving void where a companion had stood just moments before. The air carried a faint scent of warmed stone and desert dust, an ordinary aroma rendered eerie by the absence of human presence. Every instinct screamed that the cliffs held more than verticality. They seemed to conceal something untouchable, something that had claimed the missing climber before anyone could react. Erosion carved the Entrada sandstone into thin, fragile shelves and vertiginous spires that defy both gravity and expectation. Sunlight alternates between blinding glare and shadowed recesses, making every ledge and crack deceptively complex. Gusts rush unpredictably through the gaps, amplifying the sense of exposure for anyone daring to traverse the cliffs. Sand and loose rocks slip beneath each careful step, emphasizing the canyon's uncompromising nature and the constant tension between human balance and natural forces. Over time, frost and flash floods have hollowed certain pillars, producing narrow crevices and hidden alcoves that even experienced climbers approach with hesitation. Each vertical wall seems alive in its subtle shifts and textures, testing every step with a quiet, patient vigilance. Old climbing logs recount instances where hikers were swept off ledges by sudden gusts, sometimes never to be seen again despite intensive searches. Park rangers have long warned that Fisher Tower's remote spires amplify the risk of isolation, making each misstep potentially fatal. Oral history among desert guides speaks of individuals vanishing without a trace, footprints erased by wind and sand before they could be tracked. One account from the early 1980s describes a climbing party finding empty climbing harnesses dangling from a high ledge, the ropes still anchored, but with no body in sight. Each record underscores the cliff's combination of beauty and peril, drawing adventurers into a landscape that does not forgive error and leaves unanswered questions that persist through decades. The shelf where the climber disappeared barely accommodates a single footstep, bordered by sheer drops and jagged pinnacles. Nearby, a helmet lies in the sand, its strap fluttering faintly with each breeze. No footprints lead away, no equipment indicates an emergency descent, and the surrounding crevices remain undisturbed. A small tuft of grass pressed between rock layers shifts underfoot, but nothing else betrays movement. The juxtaposition of human presence and sudden absence leaves a chilling impression, as though the cliff itself swallowed the missing hiker whole. Even seasoned climbers speak of a strange sensation along this ledge, as if the air itself resists passage and preserves the memory of those who have vanished. Vertigo tightens the chest of anyone venturing along the cliffs, and the echo of a single shout ricochets unnaturally between the spires. Shadows shift rapidly with the sun, making safe-looking ledges appear treacherous. Experienced mountaineers describe the unsettling sensation that the towers watch intruders, a silent authority that measures risk and fear alike. The constant play of light on rough sandstone produces illusions of depth and distance, tricking the eye into misjudging both space and stability. Even the most confident climbers admit that navigating these ledges demands constant vigilance, each step amplified by isolation and altitude. The layered composition of sandstone produces hidden weaknesses, and fractures can propagate silently underfoot. Wind, sun, and sudden rain alter these fragile surfaces in ways that are often invisible to climbers. Tiny fissures, invisible to the naked eye, can grow into perilous gaps under pressure, yet at the same time, some seemingly large cracks remain harmless. While accidental falls remain plausible, the absence of disturbed debris or evidence makes the disappearance especially confounding. Crevices and overhangs offer natural concealment, yet nothing found suggests intentional hiding, leaving only uncertainty and speculation that stretches from logical theory to whispered rumour. Nearby ledges display faint scratches and scuffs, but they do not form a coherent path. Climbing gear appears deliberately placed, yet footprints are absent, adding to the mystery. Light filtering between the spires creates illusions, connecting ledges that are in fact separated by impossible gaps. Small piles of sand appear unnaturally smooth, suggesting careful placement or the effects of wind that mimic deliberate arrangement. Each oddity challenges perception, suggesting the cliffs themselves manipulate what can be observed, and leaving investigators questioning the boundary between natural hazard and unexplained phenomenon. Small crevices harbour hardy desert plants, clinging to life on sheer walls, and occasional lizards dart across sun-warmed rock, indifferent to human concern. Dust drifts through the air, suspended in shafts of light, making movement visible as a ghostly shimmer. Beetles scuttle between cracks while distant birds trace arcing paths around the spires. The cliff's verticality magnifies even tiny disturbances, and the interplay of light, shadow, and wind creates an ever-changing illusion of depth and distance. This living environment appears both beautiful and hostile, enhancing the sense that the missing climber has become part of the tower's secret world, absorbed into a vertical labyrinth that records but never reveals. Rescue teams combed the area with drones, ropes, and trained dogs, but the missing climber was never found. Guides speculate on what might have occurred: accidental fall, hidden crevice, or some other unknown hazard, but no definitive answer emerges. Even with maps, GPS, and modern equipment, the vertical labyrinth of Fisher Towers defies complete understanding. Attempts to recreate the route have yielded conflicting observations, and even experienced mountaineers acknowledge that each climb can feel like a different landscape from day to day. Every search reinforces the sense of uncertainty, leaving the towers as both stage and enigma, a place where human assumptions dissolve against the relentless logic of stone. High on the fragile cliffs of Fisher Towers, the ledge remains empty and the spires seem to guard their secret with the patience of stone. The lost prospector of Santa Elena Canyon. A brief glint caught the sunlight along the Rio Grande, shimmering against the canyon walls as though signalling something hidden. Observers from a distant bend noted the fleeting reflection, a small silver fragment that refused to stay in one place long enough to identify. Santa Elena Canyon, carved through limestone with walls towering hundreds of feet above the river, held a quiet authority, a scale that could swallow a human being without effort. The prospector who had passed through weeks earlier had left traces so faint that they seemed almost imagined, yet now the glint suggested some remnant of his journey endured, teasing the edge of comprehension. The canyon's vertical cliffs rose relentlessly, sheer faces alternating between brilliant white in the noon sun and deep shadows that concealed every recess. Seasonal surges of the Rio Grande reshaped the riverbanks, depositing silt, shifting rocks, and sometimes erasing even the most recent footprints. Hidden alcoves and sandbars created a labyrinthine landscape, while heat waves warped distance and depth, turning solid limestone into wavering illusions. Even a careful observer could misinterpret a shadow for a ledge, a reflection for movement, and the canyon itself seemed to exploit every weakness of perception. Decades of mining records and journals speak of men who sought fortune in these arid lands, prospectors following mineral veins into passages that now look almost impossibly narrow. One entry mentions a prospector who, after days of trekking along the river, simply stopped writing. Maps and notes describe the canyon's bends in meticulous detail, yet every search eventually concluded with nothing. No body, no dragged gear, no final campsite. Locals recall rumours of sudden mists that rise from the river, unnerving travellers, while desert guides speak in hushed tones of ghostly footsteps and flickering reflections that vanish when approached. Among the few clues left behind, a pickaxe rested against a small limestone outcropping, its handle worn and polished by repeated use. Dust had settled across its edge, and a small scrap of canvas, possibly from a prospector's satchel, clung to a crevice. No footprints led away, no dragging mark suggested a fall, and yet the items were carefully arranged, almost as if paused mid-use. Nearby, a scattering of river pebbles seemed unnaturally balanced, forming lines that disappeared into shadow, inviting speculation about deliberate placement versus random coincidence. The canyon amplifies every sound and gesture. A voice carries unexpectedly far, bouncing between walls and ricocheting over unseen cliffs, distorting in pitch and timing. Even the faintest movement of water over rock can sound like a human footstep or the scraping of metal. Hikers who later retraced the prospector's route described a creeping disorientation. A stone ledge that seemed reachable from one angle vanished from another, and the canyon's scale pressed down, making the journey feel endless despite covering little ground. Pools of water, suspended in limestone depressions, reflected sunlight in irregular patterns, creating fleeting illusions of pathways and steps that did not exist. Wild desert flora clung stubbornly to fissures in the cliffs, their tiny roots gripping the rock with surprising tenacity. Lizards darted across sun-warmed stone, moving without concern for human observers, while dust motes drifted in slanted light like miniature spectres. These environmental details, so subtle yet persistent, heightened the sense that the canyon was alive, attentive, and capable of misdirecting those who sought clarity. Footprints traced along the sandbar near the river ended abruptly. The prospector's steps vanished without warning, leaving an unsettling blank space where the next move might have been. Observers noticed slight disturbances in the limestone walls above, areas where sand had shifted recently, though there were no clear signs of a climb or descent. A small pile of stones leaned against a boulder as though marking a passage, yet the pattern repeated at no other point, suggesting either an abandoned practice or something more enigmatic. Modern searches have utilized drones, GPS mapping, and detailed topographic analysis, yet the canyon's vastness and vertical complexity defy complete examination. Rangers and visitors report occasional anomalies, reflections that appear in impossible places, faint sounds echoing in the wrong direction, or gear glimpsed through cracks that vanish when approached. Each observation reinforces the mystery, blurring the line between rational explanation and the canyon's impenetrable secrets. Even the prospector's historical records offer no conclusion. His journals, left open on a flat rock, contain descriptions of the river's bends, mineral veins, and occasional wildlife sightings, yet they end mid-sentence abruptly. Nothing within the pages predicts his disappearance. Nothing explains the traces of his presence that persisted just long enough to hint at movement without ever confirming it. Modern visitors stand in the same spots, observing the same play of light, the same river reflections, the same towering limestone walls, yet each leaves with a sense of incompletion, as though the canyon had withheld its answer intentionally. Far above the Rio Grande, Santa Elena Canyon maintains its secrets. The prospector's artifacts, subtle disturbances in sand and stone, and the faint echoing of imagined footsteps all exist in a delicate balance between natural explanation and persistent mystery. Every reflection, every whisper of wind, and every sudden shift in shadow reinforces the canyon's quiet indifference to human inquiry. The river winds through the limestone like a thread of silver, and the canyon watches in silence, keeping every prospector, every lost step, and every unanswered question tightly within its walls. The river runner of Labyrinth Canyon. A lone kayak lay wedged in a narrow side channel of Labyrinth Canyon, its single blade frozen still in the clear morning water while the sun lit the sheer red rock walls above. The main channel of the Green River flowed quietly beyond, wide and slow under calm skies, but this sidearm, half hidden, cut off by rock ledges and driftwood, seemed almost forgotten. There was no sign of the occupant. No paddle snapped against the hull, no footprints on the soft sand, no discarded jacket or gear. The kayak's placement suggested deliberate positioning, but the question remained: how had it arrived so far upstream, against even the slow current of the river? Labyrinth Canyon stretches roughly 68 river miles between Green River, Utah and Mineral Bottom, offering a flat water float through towering sandstone walls, desert varnish cliffs, and side canyons carved over millennia. Its labyrinthine corridors feature layers of Navajo sandstone, giving way to Jurassic and Permian strata, producing a series of loops, alcoves, and narrow fingers that can easily disorient the unprepared. One of its most striking formations, Bow Knot Bend, nearly doubles back on itself, separated at one point by just 800 yards of rock saddle. Paddlers navigating these hidden channels must pay close attention to landmarks, yet even experienced guides can be fooled, losing sight of the main river in minutes. At first glance, the craft seemed to belong to a solo adventurer exploring a secluded finger of the canyon. But the more experienced boaters who examined it noted anomalies. The kayak was a hard-shell touring vessel built for long, stable floats rather than scrambling over rocks. Its bow rested flush against a shallow bank, the stern floating in a calm pool behind a fallen juniper snag. There was no evidence of capsizing or drag marks. It looked as though someone had very deliberately placed it there, perhaps after landing upstream, or propelled it upstream under impossible circumstances. The canyon offers almost no access by land for much of its length. Climbing from river to shore requires careful planning. Walls often rise straight from the water, and once inside a side channel, the main river disappears from view. There is no cell phone coverage, no roads, and no easy overland escape. Visitors are expected to be self-reliant, carrying water, emergency supplies, and navigation gear, because rescue may be days away. That isolation lends the canyon a quiet permanence. Cliffs swallow sound, and the only living signs are occasional birds or wind brushing against sandstone. On that morning, the silence felt wrong. The kayak's presence hinted at a human story abruptly interrupted. Searchers combed upstream pools, side channels, and sandy beaches under overhangs for footprints or possessions. They found nothing. The kayak's load was minimal. Everything seemed removed: personal effects, dry bags, even a small anchor. It was as if someone had climbed out of the craft and vanished, leaving no trace behind. Experienced river guides, who knew the side channels and hidden alcoves better than anyone, could not explain. No accidental drift, no flood currents, no submerged back eddy could plausibly have carried the kayak upstream and placed it gently in that exact location. Speculation among paddlers varied. Some suggested the individual had tried to explore a hidden alcove, leaving the kayak temporarily to map or photograph it, only to meet misfortune. Yet no blood, no gear, no traces of a fall were found. Others whispered about unusual currents or eddies invisible on the map, capable of catching an unwary paddler, but the kayak's deliberate positioning suggested human agency. Could it have been a second person, unknown to the world, who pulled the craft from the water before disappearing? Or did the canyon itself conceal a method of movement the outside world could never see? The mystery deepened when the kayak's serial number was traced to a rental outfit more than 100 miles away. Records indicated a single renter, whose checkout log ended 5 days before the kayak's discovery. No subsequent check-in or missing person report existed. Local authorities treated it as abandoned property, not a crime scene. Even the rental company could not explain. That someone had transported the kayak into a remote, nearly inaccessible channel and then vanished without a trace seemed impossible yet undeniable. Seasonal water levels may have left the kayak stranded in a calm pool. The Green River flows slowly in this section, under 1 foot per mile, producing eddies and side channels that appear when water levels drop. These isolated pockets could hold a craft undisturbed for days, yet they could not explain how it had travelled upstream or why its occupant had disappeared. The quietude that followed the discovery added to the unease. Rangers and search parties returned repeatedly, but found only stillness. Wind-brushing sandstone, slow green water threading through canyon bends, red walls holding secrets. The kayak remained untouched, and the missing paddler remained missing. Some visitors later reported faint, distant voices in narrow side gorges when the wind was still, muffled and without source, while others spoke of the canyon retaining a memory of those who probed too far. No evidence ever surfaced of accident or foul play. No bones, no personal effects, no signs of struggle. The area developed a whispered reputation among paddlers. Some carried small crosses or left cairns near the kayak, tokens of respect or dread. The side channel became a place to avoid, a pocket of quiet menace in an otherwise serene river journey. Guides began steering groups away from that arm of the canyon, leaving the kayak and its secrets undisturbed. Years passed. The kayak slowly bleached in the desert sun, a quiet sentinel, while the story circulated among paddlers and park staff, who added their own observations of unexplained noises or sudden shifts of wind in the side channels. Some swore the water seemed to shift against them when they approached the kayak, a subtle resistance that left even seasoned boaters unsettled. Others felt the walls of the canyon watching, absorbing footsteps, erasing stories, and leaving only fragments of human presence in the memory of stone and water. The kayak remains wedged in Labyrinth Canyon, untouched and bleached by the sun, a silent witness to a journey whose path no one has ever traced, and a disappearance the canyon itself seems determined to keep. The Hollow Creek Geological Anomaly. Nestled deep in a seldom visited corner of the Mojave Desert, Hollow Creek revealed a canyon whose walls concealed rock formations unlike anything documented nearby. The narrow channel wound through cliffs of red and ochre, sun-baked in the arid air with loose gravel underfoot and the occasional tumbleweed caught on stone ledges. Seasonal washes ran shallow and irregular along the creek bed, cutting sharply through the rock during rare desert floods and leaving behind fine sediment and scattered pebbles. The extreme heat and dryness of the Mojave ensured that the canyon remained largely untouched, accessible only to those willing to traverse treacherous terrain. Researchers first noticed the anomaly while mapping the canyon's sedimentary layers for a regional geological survey. What appeared at first glance to be ordinary strata soon revealed patterns that contradicted known formations in the surrounding Mojave region. The rocks seemed to tell a story, but one no geologist could yet read. Rising in bands of sandstone, limestone, and conglomerate, the canyon walls reveal the patient accumulation of sediment over millions of years. These deposits, common across the Mojave, record cycles of ancient riverbeds, desert floods, and intermittent volcanic ashfalls. Typically, geologists can trace clear sequences: sweeping sandstone dunes, shallow inland seas leaving limestone beds, and conglomerates marking periods of torrential water flow. In Hollow Creek, however, certain bands appeared to bend, twist, and intersect at angles that seemed impossible given the surrounding formations. Quartz-rich layers intersected limestone at diagonal inclines, and sediment layers that should have eroded persisted intact. Every measurement, from thickness to mineral composition, contradicted expectations, and the canyon's geologic context only amplified the strangeness of what was observed. Within a narrow bend of the creek, geologists discovered striations and mineral layers that twisted at angles no field guide could explain. Some layers were finely laminated, almost paper-thin, yet extended over several feet, curving upward where the surrounding rock remained flat. Others contained unusually high concentrations of manganese, iron, and trace amounts of rare minerals, giving the stone a subtle metallic shimmer under the sun. Small embedded fossils of ancient mollusks and desert plants added another layer of intrigue, suggesting periods of deposition that did not align with the surrounding strata. Attempts to extract samples for laboratory analysis yielded nothing conclusive. Radiometric dating returned normal age ranges, yet the physical arrangement seemed inexplicable. It was a formation that followed natural laws yet seemed to bend them at the same time. An unexpected discovery within these layers added yet another dimension to the puzzle. Tiny veins of a translucent mineral, previously undocumented in the Mojave, ran through the rock at irregular angles, catching sunlight and scattering it into subtle iridescent patterns. Under magnification, these veins displayed microfissures filled with microscopic crystals whose arrangement suggested slow but highly unusual chemical precipitation over vast timescales. Field notes recorded faint magnetic anomalies along certain mineral bands, and portable spectrometers detected trace elements not consistent with surrounding formations, hinting at either a rare local geochemical process or an unknown ancient event. These minute details, almost invisible to the naked eye, deepened the sense that Hollow Creek contained a geological story far more complex and deliberate than ordinary sedimentation could explain. Early field teams documented the anomaly with meticulous sketches, photographs, and GPS mapping, noting that even minor erosion could not account for the unusual layering. Survey journals described the logistical challenges of reaching the site: cliffs, loose talus, sudden drops, and narrow ledges that required careful scrambling. Even for those accustomed to desert fieldwork, the canyon was remote and unforgiving. Many noted the silence, a quiet so profound that every footstep echoed unpredictably, and wind gusts created resonant hums along the rock walls. Despite repeated visits, no evidence of collapse, faulting, or human interference was found, leaving the teams both frustrated and fascinated by a puzzle that seemed to resist observation. Multiple geological theories have been proposed, intriguing in concept but lacking full clarity. Some suggested rare volcanic intrusions had injected mineral-rich magma between sedimentary layers, only to solidify without leaving traces of heat deformation. Others hypothesized unseen tectonic shifts had folded strata into impossible angles, but the regional fault activity did not support this scale of movement. A third theory posited that chemical sedimentation over millennia had separated minerals into precise bands, though laboratory simulations could not reproduce the patterns. Each explanation seemed reasonable in isolation, yet none accounted for the anomaly as a cohesive phenomenon, reinforcing the sense that Hollow Creek was hiding forces outside current understanding. It felt as though the canyon itself had taken on a life defined by isolation. Narrow passages funneled sudden gusts of wind, while sunlit cliffs reflected and fractured shadows that shifted with subtlety, creating the impression of motion even in stillness. The echoing walls distorted sound, making voices bounce unpredictably, and at night pale moonlight turned the stone walls into an otherworldly landscape. Observers reported a sense of disorientation, frequently losing track of previously surveyed points or mistaking one ledge for another. The combination of geological anomaly and sensory dissonance created an atmosphere of quiet unease, as if the canyon itself guarded its secrets. Researchers trying to correlate Hollow Creek with other unusual sites in the Mojave found little clarity. While scattered mineral irregularities had been recorded in volcanic or tectonically active regions, none exhibited the curvature, precision, and cross-layering found here. Satellite imagery and remote sensing techniques revealed no subterranean activity to explain the formations, and regional geological surveys failed to provide precedent. The canyon's isolation, coupled with its complex geology, allowed the anomaly to remain almost entirely concealed, challenging even modern technology to account for its existence. Each expedition returned with more questions than answers, carrying rock samples, photographs, and notes that only deepened the enigma. Discussions at conferences sparked curiosity, but also frustration. The anomaly had no official record in published surveys, governmental databases, or historical exploration logs. Amateur geologists and desert explorers who ventured into Hollow Creek described a humbling experience, noting the canyon's disorienting layout and the unsettling perfection of the unusual layers. Over time, Hollow Creek became a whispered name among desert specialists, a symbol of geological defiance and hidden complexity, where science and mystery intersected in the Mojave's vast expanse. The layers in Hollow Creek remain a silent testament to forces no one has yet understood, holding their secrets in the heart of the desert. The petroglyph puzzle of Chaco Canyon. High above the canyon floor, a series of petroglyphs cling to a sheer cliff face in Chaco Canyon, their precise meaning hidden behind centuries of weathering and inaccessibility. The sandstone walls, bleached pale by desert sun, rise abruptly from the arid ground, forcing observers to navigate precarious ledges just to glimpse the etched symbols. Archaeologists first recorded these carvings in the mid-20th century, noting their unusual placement high above the main trail and their isolation from other ceremonial structures. The patterns, some geometric and some curiously figurative, suggest intention and purpose, yet the absence of nearby dwellings or pathways leaves their function enigmatic. Even now, modern teams must use ropes, binoculars, and careful mapping to approach them, highlighting the canyon's role in both preserving and obscuring human history. Chaco Canyon, in the heart of New Mexico's San Juan Basin, served as a central hub of ancestral Puebloan culture between roughly 900 and 1150 CE. Its massive stone structures, including the great houses of Pueblo Bonito and Chetroquetl, were linked by wide roads stretching across the desert, some leading tens of miles to outlying settlements. Kivas, ceremonial chambers dug into the ground, punctuated the canyon floor, providing spaces for religious observances. Within this context, petroglyphs offered a visual language, a means to communicate ideas across time and space. While many carvings are found near habitation sites or ceremonial areas, the cliffside symbols of Hollow Creek overlook a section of the canyon rarely visited by humans, setting them apart and raising questions about their intended audience and purpose. The symbols, etched deep into the cliff, form repeating geometric shapes and enigmatic figures, some small enough to require close inspection, others spanning several feet across the stone. Circular motifs, zigzag lines, and abstract humanoid shapes appear alongside what might be representations of animals or celestial bodies. Scholars have noted that some of these carvings align with the sun's path at solstices or equinoxes, hinting at astronomical significance. The rock itself is coarse and uneven, yet the carvings maintain a remarkable consistency in depth and proportion, suggesting skilled craftsmanship. Even the weathering patterns fail to obscure the precision of these lines, preserving a faint but unmistakable message left behind by hands long gone. Field teams have risked narrow ledges and steep ascents to photograph and map the petroglyphs, only to be frustrated by shadows, crumbling rock, and the sheer difficulty of access. In some cases, safety ropes were the only barrier between the geologists and a fall that could have been fatal. Sketches made by early archaeologists depict a series of repeating shapes, each documented from multiple angles to compensate for perspective distortion. Modern methods, including high-resolution photography, 3D scanning, and drone surveys, have added layers of detail, yet the challenge of capturing the carvings in their entirety persists. Every expedition reinforces the canyon's role as both a repository of human expression and a natural guardian of secrecy. Enduring the relentless passage of time, the petroglyphs have survived both natural erosion and centuries of human interference. Researchers note that even minor contacts, such as touching the sandstone or the use of cleaning brushes, can accelerate erosion and obscure subtle markings. Local Navajo communities, who have inhabited the canyon region for generations, emphasize the spiritual significance of these carvings, considering them messages from ancestors meant to be seen but not disturbed. Preservation efforts now balance careful scientific documentation with respect for these cultural values, using non-invasive imaging, laser scanning, and drones to study the symbols without physical contact. These measures have revealed previously unnoticed details, micro-etchings along fissures, faint symbols that align with nearby solar markers, and subtle differences in carving depth that may indicate intentional layering of messages. Some archaeologists suggest the petroglyphs mark astronomical cycles, serving as a primitive calendar or star map, while others interpret them as ritualistic or territorial messages, yet no consensus has emerged. Solar and lunar alignments appear plausible in several cases, particularly when the sun rises or sets behind specific carvings during seasonal transitions. Others argue that the motifs represent clan symbols, spiritual guides, or recording methods for events significant to the community. Debate continues because each explanation accounts for only part of the evidence, leaving the symbol's full purpose unresolved. Even advanced imaging techniques fail to reveal inscriptions hidden in shadows or micro-etchings that might provide further insight. The cliff walls rise like silent sentinels, and when the wind passes through the canyon, the faint echo of shifting rock seems to whisper along ledges that few humans ever tread. Sunlight fractures across the sandstone in sharp streaks at dawn and dusk, illuminating some carvings while leaving others in darkness. Visitors often report a disorienting sensation, as if the cliff is larger and more complex than topographical maps suggest. The canyon's scale, combined with the carving's elevation, creates an almost theatrical presentation, framing the petroglyphs in isolation and emphasizing their inaccessibility. Even with ropes, ladders, and drones, human observers remain secondary to the silent permanence of the etched symbols. Though examined for decades, the symbols remain enigmatic, their purpose known only to those who vanished centuries ago. Comparative studies with other Puebloan sites offer hints, but no definitive answers. Similar motifs appear across the region, but never in the same configuration or on such precarious cliffs. Each attempt to cross-reference the symbols with language, oral histories, or ritual practice produces partial explanations that raise further questions. The more scholars investigate, the clearer it becomes that Chaco Canyon's petroglyphs are less a record of human activity than a challenge, an invitation to observe, decipher, and wonder. Each expedition returns with meticulous records and careful photographs, yet each also departs with the same uneasy recognition. The petroglyphs retain their mystery, perched above the canyon floor where centuries of wind and sun have done little to diminish their enigma. Local guides and amateur explorers describe a strange sensation upon reaching the cliff, a mixture of reverence, awe, and the subtle thrill of approaching something deliberately concealed. The canyon itself, through its cliffs, ledges, and silent walls, enforces the separation between human curiosity and ancient intent, preserving an unresolved puzzle in the landscape. The petroglyphs of Chaco Canyon endure in quiet defiance, their meaning suspended above the desert floor where few eyes can follow and even fewer hands can touch. The botanist of Canyon de Chelly. A solitary figure had entered the twisting trails of Canyon de Chelly, a botanist intent on cataloguing the rare cliffside flora, and vanished without a trace among the sunlit walls. The sandstone cliffs rose abruptly from the canyon floor, coloured in warm shades of red and ochre, with narrow ledges that demanded careful footing. Streams of sunlight filtered into hidden alcoves, revealing pockets of vegetation clinging stubbornly to the rock face, yet many areas remained shrouded in shadow. The canyon, carved over millennia by the Chinle Wash and its tributaries, forms a maze of chutes and mesas, a place both breathtaking and forbidding to the uninitiated. The botanist's mission had been ambitious: to map and record species of plants found only in these microclimates, where sunlight, moisture, and soil composition create ecological niches unlike any other in the American Southwest. The canyon's mesas and sheer cliffs form microclimates that shelter plants found nowhere else in the Southwest, from delicate desert wildflowers to resilient shrubs clinging to sandstone ledges. Cacti, yucca, and cliff rose grow alongside more subtle specimens, tiny succulents hidden in crevices, and ephemeral flowers that bloom only after rare desert rains. The Chinle Formation's soft sandstones allow roots to penetrate shallow layers of sediment, and moisture trapped in shaded alcoves sustains life through long, dry seasons. Archaeological evidence shows that these cliffs were also once traversed and cultivated by ancestral Puebloans, who built terraces and small gardens along the canyon's narrower shelves. The botanist had noted the convergence of ecological and historical significance, observing how both natural and human forces shaped the canyon's living mosaic. Equipped with notebooks, specimen bags, and GPS equipment, the botanist moved carefully along narrow ledges, marking each plant and noting subtle differences in soil and sunlight. Every observation required caution, as sudden drops or loose stones could turn a routine collection into a disaster. The steep walls funneled occasional gusts of wind unpredictably, and temperatures swung dramatically between sun-drenched ledges and shaded alcoves. Despite these challenges, the botanist meticulously recorded leaf shape, flower coloration, and growth patterns, sometimes venturing to cliffside niches barely visible from the canyon floor. The work demanded both endurance and attention to detail, blending scientific observation with careful navigation of the terrain itself. The following morning, searchers found a water bottle resting against a ledge and a journal left open, its last entry abruptly ending mid-sentence, as if the writer had vanished into thin air. No footprints led away from the area, and no disturbances suggested where the botanist might have gone. Rope and climbing gear lay where they had been last used, suggesting no struggle or fall. Rescue teams retraced the trails meticulously, yet each path ended at narrow chutes or sheer drops, with no further evidence. The sudden absence left questions that could not be answered. Had the botanist misstepped, or had some other force intervened? Some rare species near the site seemed disturbed, their leaves crushed or bent in unusual ways, while others appeared untouched despite the abrupt disappearance, creating a puzzling pattern of interaction with the landscape. Certain plants, normally low to the ground, had unusual vertical growth, perhaps influenced by the microclimate, while others showed no signs of human or animal interference. Soil samples collected nearby revealed minor anomalies in moisture retention and mineral composition, unusual even for the canyon's varied microenvironments. These subtle ecological irregularities provided clues without offering certainty, hinting at a landscape both alive and indifferent to human observation. The petroglyphs of nearby cliffs had long been known to Navajo elders, who spoke of cliffs where travelers sometimes vanished, and of narrow trails once used by their ancestors that are now erased by centuries of wind and erosion. Local stories suggested that the canyon held more than just plants. Spirits of the ancestors lingered in certain alcoves, guiding or warning those who dared explore too far. These oral histories, while never verified in a scientific sense, resonated with searchers, who often reported an uneasy feeling when moving through shadowed corners and winding passages. The combination of ecological anomaly and cultural narrative created a layered mystery, intertwining science with the intangible memory of human history. Researchers note that even minor contacts, such as touching the sandstone or vegetation, can alter microhabitats or accelerate erosion, a concern amplified by the botanist's disappearance. Preservation efforts now combine fieldwork with non-invasive methods. Drone photography, laser scanning, and remote sensing capture plant locations without physical interference. These techniques revealed additional details, including subtle growth patterns along shaded ledges, the alignment of certain plants with seasonal water runoff, and microecological zones previously unseen. They underscored the delicate balance of life in the canyon and the persistent unpredictability of its environment, hinting that even seasoned experts might fail to anticipate every hazard. Teams combed the canyon for days, tracing trails that led nowhere and cliffs that ended abruptly, realizing that even experienced trackers could lose orientation in the canyon's labyrinthine passages. Volunteers and professional guides noted the disorienting effect of the towering walls, which distorted sightlines and echoed sound in unexpected ways. Narrow channels twisted back on themselves, and dry washes that appeared passable at first glance often terminated at impassable boulder fields or drop-offs. Each search reinforced the sense that the canyon was a living labyrinth, one that could conceal a person completely without leaving evidence, and that human intuition often faltered in the face of geological complexity. The walls themselves seemed to watch, casting long shadows across narrow channels, while the occasional call of a raven or distant coyote added a note of uncanny presence to the otherwise still desert air. Sunlight fractured across ledges, highlighting unexpected pockets of green amidst a sea of sandstone, and temperature shifts made the environment feel almost mutable. Observers described a sense of vertigo and isolation, as if the canyon itself imposed its own rules, shaping what could be seen, traversed, and understood. Even the faintest trail could vanish beneath sand, stones, or brush, leaving no trace of passage. The botanist's fate remains suspended among the cliffs and hidden groves, a mystery whispered by the plants themselves and preserved in the quiet geometry of the canyon. The Night Choir of Fjadraglufur. On certain nights, the walls of Fjadraglufur Canyon seem to sing, carrying harmonic tones that drift across the glacial river, audible even when the air is perfectly still. Travellers pause mid-step, straining to discern whether the sounds come from wind, water, or something more inexplicable. The canyon's narrow channels and moss-covered cliffs, carved over millennia by retreating glaciers, create natural corridors that can amplify even the faintest vibration. The air is crisp, heavy with the scent of damp stone and wet moss, and the soft gurgle of the Fjadra River mingles with the tonal resonance, forming a soundscape both natural and otherworldly. Hikers often remark on a subtle vibration underfoot, as though the canyon itself resonates with voices long forgotten yet eerily precise. The canyon stretches over 2 kilometers in sinuous curves, its cliffs rising between 100 and 120 meters above the riverbed. The rock is predominantly basalt, interspersed with sedimentary layers, fractured and weathered to form narrow alcoves and smooth surfaces. Mosses and lichens cling to nearly every crevice, their thick carpets retaining moisture that affects how sound travels. Pools and small waterfalls punctuate the river's path, reflecting moonlight and adding delicate background tones to the canyon's acoustics. Even small shifts in water flow can change the tonal quality of sounds, as currents passing over stones create harmonic overtones. This combination of geological and ecological features forms a natural amphitheatre in which ordinary noises are transformed into something haunting and melodic. Hikers and travellers recount hearing voices, or what resembles a chorus, rising from the canyon floor, faint at first but growing in resonance as they listen in the dark. Some describe layered harmonics, a series of notes that seem to shift as they move along the trail, as if the canyon is orchestrating a performance around them. Others claim the sounds appear to respond to human presence, fading when approached and returning when observers retreat. Even the most experienced guides, familiar with every twist of the canyon, acknowledge moments when the harmonics seem to originate from nowhere, leaving a lingering sense of awe and unease. One geologist reported standing at the river's edge, recording the harmonics with specialized microphones, only to find playback contained additional tones that were not audible to the ear during observation. Researchers suggest that the combination of narrow passages, uneven rock surfaces, and turbulent river flow could generate unintentional harmonic tones, though not all reported sounds can be explained this way. Studies using microphones, spectral analysis, and acoustic modelling have reproduced some tonal patterns, particularly where water rushes over stone formations or air currents funnel through narrow gaps. Yet certain nights produce harmonics that resist measurement, fluctuating in pitch, volume, and direction without discernible cause. Seasonal changes exacerbate this unpredictability. Winter freezes can create resonant ice sheets, summer melt increases water flow, and sudden gusts of wind alter the acoustic paths. Scientists describe Fjadraglufur as a living laboratory of sound, one in which human perception and environmental variables interact in ways still not fully understood. Icelandic folklore adds another layer of intrigue, speaking of hidden elves and spirits inhabiting canyon walls. Legends recount travellers guided by phantom voices along safe paths or warned away from sudden drops, as if the canyon itself were communicating. Some tales describe harmonics resembling songs of long-vanished herders or ancient chants, echoing off the cliffs in rhythm with the glacial river below. Historical accounts from early explorers mention hearing tones that seemed to follow them for hours, fading only when the canyon widened into open terrain. These stories, though anecdotal, underscore the canyon's enduring reputation for auditory anomalies and its place in Icelandic imagination. Environmental conditions further complicate the phenomenon. Temperature inversions and pockets of cold air can bend sound waves, creating unusual resonance and apparent movement of tones. Moss and wet rocks add subtle reverberation, while thin sheets of glacial ice can vibrate under the river's flow, producing unanticipated harmonic patterns. Even small waterfalls contribute delicate undertones that, mingle with echoes, creating sequences of sound that seem almost intentional. The canyon's microclimates, shifting wind patterns, and seasonal variations make it impossible to predict precisely how harmonics will manifest, reinforcing the mystery experienced by each visitor. Under moonlight, shadows stretch across the river, and even the smallest noise, footsteps on stone or rustling vegetation, can merge with the canyon's harmonics, making it impossible to discern origin from illusion. The faintest call of a raven or distant coyote adds to the sense of a chorus with an unpredictable source. Visitors describe a feeling of vertigo or temporal distortion, as though the canyon alters perception, stretching moments when the harmonics begin and collapsing them as they fade. Even those familiar with the canyon report disorientation, as the interplay of echo, tone, and shadow blurs the boundary between natural phenomenon and imagined sound. Accounts from researchers and hikers reveal that some nights, recordings fail to capture the harmonics entirely, while other nights introduce new, unrecorded tones. Attempts to locate the source of these sounds often end in confusion, with echoes bouncing off multiple cliff faces and blending into an untraceable pattern. This unpredictability, combined with the canyon's immense walls and dense moss cover, reinforces the sensation that the sounds are not entirely of the physical world. The canyon seems capable of crafting a performance beyond human comprehension, one that merges geology, water, climate, and imagination into an auditory enigma. Even with modern equipment and extensive study, Fjadraglufur continues to produce harmonics that defy explanation. Microphones, acoustic sensors, and laser mapping can capture some aspects, but the full experience eludes replication. Visitors leave the canyon with questions that cannot be answered. Is it an illusion, a natural phenomenon, or something more? The canyon maintains its power to awe, unsettle, and inspire, a place where science and mystery coexist in the delicate resonance of rock and river. Fjadraglufur's night choir lingers between river and cliff, a phantom symphony that vanishes before it can be fully understood. The Redwall Cavern Footprints. Footprints appeared in Redwall Cavern's dust, fresh and unbroken, tracing a path that seemed to emerge from nowhere along the smooth sandstone floor. Searchers arriving at the alcove described a sense of disbelief, for the cavern's location was remote, accessible only via a narrow ledge carved into the Redwall limestone. The prints were human in size and shape, yet their placement made no sense. The surrounding terrain offered no clear route for an approach, and the sheer cliffs guarding the alcove suggested that anyone entering had defied both gravity and expectation. Each impression seemed deliberately placed, its edges crisp in the soft powdery dust that had accumulated over weeks, as though someone, or something, had stepped lightly, aware of the cavern's solitude. The cavern itself is a geological marvel, formed by eons of erosion that hollowed out the Redwall limestone and its sandstone layers. Its smooth, almost polished walls retain the faintest disturbances, whether from water trickles, falling pebbles, or, in this case, footprints. The alcove extends several dozen meters into the cliff face, wide enough to shelter a small group, yet narrow enough that light reaches only the entrance during most of the day. Seasonal changes affect the preservation of dust and impressions. Summer heat dries the floor, while winter humidity can soften it, allowing marks to form more clearly but also fade unpredictably. These conditions made the sudden appearance of the footprints all the more perplexing. Each step bore the weight of an unseen traveller, the depth and spacing suggesting deliberate movement, as though the figure had paused at intervals to survey the surroundings. Some prints angled toward the canyon's interior, while others approached the alcove's walls, almost brushing the rocky surfaces as if testing the boundaries of the space. Observers noted subtle variations in pressure, small ridges where toes had gripped the sandstone, and the consistent alignment of heel to toe. Yet no trail led to the cavern's entrance, and none extended outward, leaving a paradox, evidence of travel without an origin or destination. Tiny flecks of mineral deposits along the alcove floor revealed subtle clues overlooked at first glance, their shimmer tracing a faint path that seemed to complement the footprints. Analysis of these mineral flecks showed small amounts of iron oxide and quartz dust, likely eroded from the nearby Redwall limestone and carried in by minor wind currents or water seepage. Their arrangement suggested that whatever had made the footprints had also disturbed these delicate particles, leaving an almost imperceptible trail leading to the farthest edge of the alcove. Investigators noted that the mineral dust would normally settle evenly over weeks, yet these traces appeared freshly displaced, as if something had interacted with the canyon floor moments before the prints were discovered. This detail, easily missed in broader surveys, added a new layer of mystery, hinting at the presence of movement too subtle for standard observation, yet precise enough to leave an enduring signature in the stone dust. Searchers and geologists documented the footprints meticulously, photographing each angle, taking soil samples, and marking their positions with flags. They used GPS devices to map the alcove in 3 dimensions, ensuring that every step was recorded for later analysis. Despite these efforts, no clue emerged to explain how the prints had been formed. Attempts to reconstruct possible approaches revealed that any human movement would have required scaling vertical cliffs or navigating narrow ledges with near impossible precision. The alcove itself appeared untouched beyond the trail of footprints, further deepening the mystery. Several theories emerged. Wind or minor rock slides could, in rare circumstances, produce shallow depressions in dust or sand, yet none could replicate the depth, clarity, and precise human-like form of these prints. Small animals, such as foxes or bobcats, were suggested as a possibility, though paw prints differ noticeably from human feet, and no tracks aligned with the spacing or stride observed. Occasional flooding in nearby channels was also considered. Water could erode or redeposit sediment, forming impressions. Still, the alcove's location high above the river rendered this explanation implausible, as no water had recently reached the floor. Historical context adds another layer to the enigma. Redwall Cavern has a modest record of human activity. Indigenous peoples sometimes used alcoves for shelter, and early Grand Canyon explorers occasionally mapped these remote spaces. Yet no accounts mentioned footprints appearing suddenly or in such isolated positions. Archaeologists confirmed that while the surrounding Redwall limestone walls bear ancient inscriptions and faint petroglyphs elsewhere, none correspond to this particular alcove. There is no evidence of temporary human habitation here, no discarded artifacts, and no signs of repeated passage, only the inexplicable solitary footprints. The environmental and geological factors of the cavern only deepen the puzzle. The sandstone floor's texture captures and preserves impressions longer than most canyon surfaces, particularly under dry, windless conditions. Dust accumulation is slow, meaning any prints should gradually fade, yet these remained sharply defined, suggesting they had appeared within a very short time frame. Even subtle humidity shifts that normally blur impressions could not account for the footprint's freshness. The combination of microclimate, sheltered alcove, and sediment consistency forms an environment where tracks can persist, but not without an obvious source or reason for their sudden creation. Morning light strikes the cavern walls, revealing shadows that seem to animate the prints. Observers describe a feeling of being watched, as though the alcove itself maintains awareness of the footprint's presence. The silence of the canyon amplifies this sensation, broken only by distant bird calls or the whisper of the wind through narrow passages. Even experienced hikers report an unsettling awareness that the alcove is both a space of shelter and of scrutiny, where the line between natural formation and deliberate human action blurs. Careful measurement and repeated observation have failed to detect any human or animal movement into or out of the alcove. Attempts to reproduce the footprints using the same environmental conditions fail to yield comparable results, and even the most precise geological simulations cannot account for the combination of depth, clarity, and isolated placement. The phenomenon remains entirely untraceable, a silent testament to an unknown passage or visitor. Every discovery within the cavern only reinforces the impossibility of the print's existence and the canyon's resistance to explanation. In Redwall Cavern, footprints linger as an unanswerable testament, a question written in stone that the canyon withholds. The Mineral Creek fire ring. Though no tracks led to the stones, a fire had scorched the ground, and a bundle of folded clothing lay precisely arranged next to the circle of blackened rock. The stillness of the canyon amplified the incongruity. No sound of approaching hikers, no trace of passage along the sandstone walls, nothing to hint at the presence of a human being who could have constructed such a fire ring in this secluded place. The embers had long since cooled, but the charcoal remained in neat concentric circles, each stone deliberately positioned, as though someone had performed this task with care and urgency. Investigators who first encountered the scene described an immediate tension, the sense that the canyon itself was guarding a secret, preserving evidence while simultaneously refusing to reveal its source. The creek that winds through the canyon floor contributes both beauty and complexity to the setting. Mineral Creek flows in shallow pools interrupted by sandstone outcrops and small riffles, its waters clear and cold, fed by upstream springs and runoff from higher ledges. The alcove containing the fire ring is tucked along a slight bend in the creek, protected by overhanging cliffs that shield it from both wind and direct sunlight for much of the day. These natural conditions allow debris to accumulate slowly, ash to settle, and clothing left on the flat rock to remain dry. Yet they also create a paradox. The same conditions that preserve traces make it extraordinarily difficult for anyone to approach unnoticed. The fire ring itself is remarkable in its simplicity and precision. Stones of varying sizes are carefully aligned, forming a perfect circle about a meter in diameter. Ash layers within the ring show signs of multiple burns, small charred twigs suggesting recent campfire activity, and faint traces of plant resin that would have lent the smoke a pungent, lingering aroma. Beside it, the clothing, lightweight but durable fabric, was folded neatly, as if placed deliberately after the fire went out. Investigators noted its condition. Free from dust, moisture or sand, the fabric seemed almost staged, resting lightly on the sun-warmed rock, a quiet assertion of human presence that defied explanation. The site was thoroughly documented, with photographs and three-dimensional mapping, yet the fire ring remained unconnected to any approach or trail. Soil samples from beneath the stones revealed minor ash deposits and trace mineral content consistent with the surrounding sandstone, but no additional clues. Tools or personal effects that might indicate a transient camper's presence were absent. Every effort to trace the origin of the fire or the clothing's owner ended in the same perplexing observation. The evidence existed, but the agent responsible could not. By shaping conditions uniquely, the canyon's microclimate preserves evidence while adding to its mystery. The alcove remains sheltered from prevailing winds, which would otherwise scatter ashes and disturb light dust accumulation. Humidity shifts with daily temperature fluctuations, creating alternating dry and slightly moist conditions that preserve delicate textures while subtly masking the passage of time. Seasonal rainfall is rare in this part of the canyon, but when it occurs, it rushes past the alcove without reaching the fire ring, allowing the circle to remain intact and the clothing dry even after minor floods. These environmental factors heighten the improbability of the scene, offering no natural explanation for why the fire ring appears maintained and recent while leaving no trace of its user. Some explanations were considered and dismissed. Local hikers occasionally use the canyon for overnight excursions, but maps, permits and logs showed no visitors in the area at the estimated time the fire ring was active. Indigenous use of nearby canyon shelters is well documented, yet one recorded no fire ring was constructed in this manner, nor clothing left folded as though deliberately staged. Accidental natural fires cannot account for the arrangement of the stones or the placement of human clothing, and no animals could have interacted with the site in such a precise, controlled way. Each proposed scenario failed to reconcile the careful human-like activity with the total absence of any traceable presence. Cultural and historical context deepens the enigma. Mineral Creek and its alcoves have long been known to explorers and Native American groups, yet these passages are notoriously difficult to access. Historical accounts describe short-term shelter and temporary encampments, but never the meticulous arrangement of a fire ring with accompanying personal effects. Journals of early Grand Canyon explorers make reference to transient human activity, yet none mention discoveries resembling the Mineral Creek scene. This isolation, combined with the precision of the fire ring, lends a paradoxical sense of deliberate human order coexisting with the impossibility of human presence. The sensory experience of the alcove contributes to its unsettling atmosphere. Light falls unevenly across the sandstone floor, casting patterns of shadow and reflection in the creek below. Small ripples of water produce faint echoes that bounce off the walls, making the space feel both larger and more intimate than it physically is. The scent of resin and ash lingers faintly, though no smoke rises, and the quiet hum of the creek fills the air with a persistent, almost hypnotic sound. Even seasoned searchers report a sense of unease, as though the canyon itself is observing the evidence and waiting to see if anyone can interpret it correctly. No subsequent investigation has yielded the owner of the fire ring or the folded clothing. Attempts to reproduce the scenario using the same environmental conditions failed to account for the total absence of tracks or disturbances outside the immediate alcove. The canyon's concealment, combined with the careful construction of the fire ring, creates a lingering tension. The evidence is deliberate, precise, and undeniably human in nature, yet completely untraceable. Researchers are left with only the objects themselves, preserved in a natural setting that seems designed to reveal without explaining, to show without telling. The Mineral Creek fire ring waits quietly beside the flowing water, a deliberate presence with no witness, no story, and no answer. The Canyon Sentinel of Bryce. A startling shadow flickered near the towering hoodoo, vanishing as quickly as it appeared, leaving the observer staring at the orange sandstone with a mix of awe and unease. The canyon floor stretched in every direction, a labyrinth of spires, fins, and amphitheaters carved by millions of years of erosion. For those standing nearby, it was difficult to distinguish natural formation from something more elusive, particularly when the light shifted and the wind carried fleeting motions that seemed almost intentional. Bryce Canyon, celebrated for its remarkable hoodoos, provides breathtaking vistas, yet some of its most enduring mysteries reside not in what is seen clearly, but in the shadows cast upon the land. Sunlight filtered through high clouds, scattering across the hoodoo's jagged surface and transforming every ledge into a stage for illusions that play tricks on the eye. Observers note how subtle differences in angle and intensity of light can exaggerate crevices and fissures, creating shapes that resemble figures or movement. Even in broad daylight, the canyon can deceive. Rocks appear taller or thinner, and distant spires seem to shift as one moves. These optical effects, well documented by geologists, contribute to reports of shadowy figures that vanish when approached, leaving only the memory of their presence behind. Voices of previous hikers and local guides echo through reports, recounting glimpses of shapes that seemed human in form but impossibly nimble or distant. One ranger described seeing a figure pause on a ledge as storm clouds gathered, only for it to disappear the moment a closer look was taken. These accounts, though anecdotal, share patterns. Sightings occur near towering spires, just before storms, and often elicit a simultaneous feeling of awe and unease. While such reports are typically dismissed as tricks of light or imagination, the consistency across independent witnesses invites further consideration. Wind whipped between narrow spires, carrying the scent of damp stone, pine, and eroded clay, while also lifting loose sand and gravel into brief swirling eddies. The canyon's acoustics amplify these subtle disturbances, turning the murmur of water in distant creeks into sounds that can be mistaken for footsteps or whispered voices. Even faint breezes can produce eerie echoes in the amphitheater, emphasizing the perception of movement. Scientists studying canyon microclimates note that these conditions are unique to formations like Bryce's hoodoos, where sudden gusts and temperature fluctuations create sensory effects rarely encountered elsewhere. Even seasoned park rangers note the uncanny pause that sweeps over the amphitheater just before a storm, when all animal activity seems to still and distant echoes stretch unnaturally. Observers report a tension in the air, as if the canyon itself is aware of the approaching weather and manipulating perception in subtle ways. Clouds advance swiftly, shifting light and shadow across the spires, producing a visual rhythm that can fool even trained eyes. Some visitors describe the effect as being watched, though no observer is present, reinforcing the sense of the hoodoo as an active, almost sentient presence. Layers of limestone, dolomite, and sandstone twist along the hoodoo's surface, their horizontal bedding punctuated by vertical fractures and overhangs that accentuate the play of light and shadow. Geologists explain that these formations result from freeze-thaw erosion, water percolation, and sediment compaction over millions of years. The resulting shapes, unpredictable yet strikingly sculptural, make it easy for the imagination to project figures or motion where none exists. Even when viewed with careful measurement and photographic analysis, the interaction of sunlight, angle, and perspective produces illusions that can mimic human or animal forms. Observation and photographic documentation found no trace of life during sightings, yet the phenomenon continued to manifest. Cameras set up to monitor specific spires captured shifting shadows that seemed to anticipate the movement of approaching observers, though automated analysis later indicated no movement along the ground. Researchers were left grappling with a paradox. The physical environment produces conditions for optical and acoustic illusions, but not all observed phenomena can be fully explained by geology or light physics alone. Ancient stories passed down by indigenous groups describe stones that watch the land, guardians that mark the passage of seasons, storms, and the cycles of life. Some hoodoos were thought to embody spirits, their forms deliberately interpreted as sentinels, both protective and enigmatic. European settlers adapted these narratives, noting the uncanny presence of certain spires and the eerie feelings they evoked during stormy weather. In this sense, the canyon sentinel is both a geological formation and a locus of human interpretation, where natural forces and cultural imagination converge. Clouds thicken over the canyon rim, the wind lifting dust and leaves into fleeting eddies, and shadows stretch and converge across the amphitheatre. Light fractures into sharp contrasts, outlines sharpen, then dissolve, giving the impression of deliberate movement across otherwise still stone. Observers report a visceral response, a blend of awe, fear, and disbelief, as the canyon demonstrates the uncanny capacity to manipulate perception. The Sentinel Spire, once simply a rock formation, becomes a stage on which human expectations and natural phenomena intersect, leaving each witness to wonder whether they have seen a trick of light, a fleeting animal, or something more inexplicable. A hush settles over the amphitheatre, broken only by the distant rush of water in hidden streams, leaving those who watch to question what is real and what is conjured by the canyon itself. No two observers perceive the same details, yet each emerges with a similar sense of wonder and unease, the paradox of a stationary stone inspiring movement in the imagination. Even on clear days, when clouds and wind are absent, the hoodoo retains an uncanny presence, as though it remembers the storms and shadows it has witnessed over countless seasons. The canyon sentinel of Bryce endures, unyielding in stone yet alive in the shadows it casts, a presence no human can fully grasp. The forgotten ledge of death. Hollow. Heat radiated off the sandstone walls of Death Hollow, casting deep shadows into the narrow washes below, while wind gusts funneled through the vertical fins with sudden intensity. The canyon is a labyrinth of jagged ridges, sheer cliffs and narrow shelves, each formation the result of millions of years of erosion, freeze-thaw cycles, and seasonal flash floods. Hikers and climbers know the area for its breathtaking vistas, yet those same vistas conceal perilous drops and loose rock that can crumble under the lightest pressure. To stand on one of the upper ledges is to feel the canyon's scale pressing in, a tangible reminder that the land is indifferent to human ambition. Jagged outcrops rise unpredictably along the canyon walls, forming shelves that appear navigable from a distance but vanish into impossibility upon approach. Geologists note that the sandstone in this section is unusually brittle, the layers tilted and fractured in ways that create a patchwork of unstable surfaces. Loose scree and hidden overhangs complicate any ascent, while sudden gusts can dislodge stones and make footing precarious. Maps of the region, drawn by early surveyors and modern topographers alike, mark trails where passage is feasible, yet they leave vast areas marked as inaccessible or untraversed. Early explorers of Death Hollow documented the canyon's treacherous interior in sparse notes and hand-drawn sketches. They spoke of shelves that could not safely support a human weight and narrow gullies that disappeared into shadowed chasms. Some ventured further than others, but nearly all accounts mention a recurring paradox. Places that seem passable from afar become lethal when approached. These historical accounts lend context to contemporary mysteries, illustrating that the canyon has long challenged human perception and physical endurance. Wind patterns within the hollow are unusual, swirling unpredictably between fins and undercuts. At certain hours, a sudden shift can produce a vacuum effect, lifting dust, sand, and small stones, sometimes making the canyon seem alive with movement where none exists. Temperature fluctuations across the canyon walls create a kaleidoscope of light and shadow, exaggerating the depth of crevices and the height of ridges. Any human attempting to navigate these surfaces must contend not only with physical barriers, but with environmental forces that amplify the canyon's natural hostility. It was during one such survey, weeks after a violent summer storm, that the paradoxical presence was noted. A lone backpack rested on a narrow shelf, wedged into a small depression in the sandstone so that it appeared immovable without deliberate effort. No trail led to the ledge, and no tracks of human passage were visible leading up or down from it. For those who approached via drone imagery or long-range binoculars, the shelf seemed impossibly positioned, suspended hundreds of feet above the canyon floor, a human artifact in a place humans could not safely reach. Experts in climbing and canyon navigation analysed the ledge and its surrounding walls. They calculated angles, slope stability, and overhang distance, determining that reaching the shelf without specialised climbing gear would be extraordinarily dangerous and unlikely. Even using ropes and anchors, a climber would have to negotiate a near-vertical face of fractured sandstone, where one misstep could be fatal. The backpack's placement contradicted every assessment of human mobility in the canyon, creating a puzzle that drew curiosity and concern from park officials and adventure researchers alike. The backpack itself was durable, made of weather-resistant fabric, and contained minor personal items that had survived exposure to sun, wind, and occasional rain. Nothing suggested recent human occupation, yet the arrangement of its contents hinted at intentional placement rather than accidental loss. The object seemed to exist as a testament to presence, paradoxically isolated yet meticulously preserved, offering no clue as to who had left it or why. Survey teams returned multiple times, using drones, ropes, and even helicopter-assisted observation, but no viable route to the ledge could be found. Each expedition confirmed the difficulty. There were no handholds or natural ledges leading to the shelf from mapped routes, and the surrounding walls were steep and unstable. Even experienced climbers with technical equipment were forced to conclude that the backpack's presence defied reasonable explanation. The canyon's harsh environment seemed to guard its secrets zealously. Small animal tracks appeared and vanished between storms, but no footprints or evidence of human passage accompanied the shelf. Sound carried strangely along the sandstone walls, amplifying wind and distant creek noise into eerie echoes. The canyon itself created an atmosphere of isolation and uncertainty, as though the ledge had always been meant to exist beyond reach, a silent observer of those who attempted to map or explore its interior. Local historians and park interpreters speculated on possible explanations. Some suggested an early explorer might have left it during an unrecorded ascent. Others considered survivalist misadventure or even a deliberate act intended to challenge or intrigue future visitors. Yet none of these theories could reconcile the physical reality. The ledge remained inaccessible, and no feasible human path led to it. The contradiction between physical possibility and factual presence reinforced the sense that Death Hollow maintains its mysteries deliberately, preserving a narrative that defies human logic. The canyon's silence on the matter contrasts sharply with the visual prominence of the ledge. Standing below, one can see how it juts outward from the cliff, a precarious shelf untouched by natural erosion that might otherwise have dislodged a resting object. Wind, rain, and heat continue their slow assault on the sandstone, yet the backpack remains, a single inexplicable imprint of human presence where none should exist. The paradox continues to draw researchers, explorers, and curious hikers who ponder the canyon's unforgiving scale and the silent testimony of its hidden ledges. The Forgotten Ledge of Death. Hollow keeps its silent witness, an impossible perch preserving the hint of a presence that no human path can explain. The Blue John Canyon Silence. Every visitor who enters Blue John Canyon carries an expectation of wind, water, and the faint stir of desert life, yet some are met with a quiet that unsettles even before it can be fully perceived. The canyon, a twisting slot of polished sandstone carved over millennia, narrows and widens unpredictably, creating spaces where sound behaves contrary to expectation. Light filters in from above, illuminating walls that seem impossibly smooth and vertical, yet these surfaces play an unseen role in shaping the environment, absorbing and reflecting sound in subtle ways that elude casual notice. For many, the first hint of unusual silence comes not as an abrupt absence but as a subtle flattening of noise, a footstep that seems muted, a whisper that cannot carry. Unlike neighbouring slot canyons, where echoes dance and amplify every motion, Blue John's passages sometimes absorb every whisper, creating the sensation that the canyon itself is holding its breath. Hikers often describe an uncanny stillness that settles around them, as if the space anticipates movement and suppresses the sounds associated with it. The canyon walls, though visually unremarkable, interact with air currents, wall angles, and rock texture to produce conditions where sound can vanish in unexpected pockets. Even experts in canyon acoustics admit that the phenomenon defies straightforward explanation. Standard models of echo, reflection, and absorption fail to account for the timing and scale of the quiet. Geologists and acoustic researchers have returned repeatedly, measuring wall surfaces, channel widths, and the minutiae of airflow through the canyon. They note that the narrowest sections create turbulent air pockets, while the widest stretches allow unusual reverberation, yet neither factor alone predicts the occurrence of silence. High-resolution microphones and decibel meters placed at intervals capture some sound. Wind, water dripping, the occasional call of birds, but often register a sudden drop to near zero where human ears perceive nothing at all. The measurements themselves are as mysterious as the experience of the canyon, offering data that simultaneously validates and deepens the enigma. Hikers describe the disorienting contrast between expected and absent sound. Footsteps that normally echo across stone corridors disappear entirely, and even shouted warnings return no reply. Some recount pausing mid-stride, listening intently to the void, only to feel as though the canyon has claimed the very air around them. This absence does not carry fear in the conventional sense. It is subtler, a dislocation of the senses that heightens awareness while suggesting a presence beyond the human frame. Observers speak of the quiet as if it were tangible, pressing against the body and amplifying every heartbeat and breath, in contrast to the absence around it. Historical journals from early surveyors occasionally reference corridors of stillness in Blue John Canyon. These mentions were often brief, appearing as footnotes to mapping expeditions or brief entries on environmental conditions, and were largely dismissed as exaggeration or misperception. Yet as modern reports accumulated from hikers, geologists, and park guides, a pattern emerged. These instances were not random but repeated in specific areas, hinting at an underlying feature of the canyon's physical structure or microclimate that interacted with human perception in ways that resisted quantification. Modern field teams equipped with sensitive audio instruments have sought to capture and study the silence scientifically. Their results are as enigmatic as the experience itself. Instruments record near 0 decibel readings for stretches that would ordinarily carry multiple environmental sounds, but subtle changes in humidity, wind, or even the position of the sun can alter these readings dramatically. Some researchers speculate that the combination of narrow slots, vertical walls, and layered sandstone creates a form of acoustic interference, where waves cancel one another, producing temporary voids of perceivable sound. Yet even this model cannot account for the human experience of quietly moving unpredictably along the canyon corridors. Visitors who linger in these silent stretches often describe an eerie, almost anticipatory sensation. Conversations taper off naturally, as if the canyon compels restraint, and even breathing becomes conscious and measured. The effect is cumulative. Over minutes or hours, a heightened awareness of all sensory input emerges, accompanied by an unsettling sense that the canyon itself is observing. Some hikers report that the quiet seems to follow them, moving with their progress through the slot walls and suddenly lifting, leaving them with the normal ambient sounds restored without warning. Local guides and folklore have long recognized the canyon's unusual acoustic properties, framing the phenomenon in narrative terms. Tales speak of corridors that listen, or of passages where the earth swallows sound to protect or conceal. While these stories are anecdotal, they echo the consistent experiences of modern visitors and researchers alike. Even in the absence of mythical framing, the canyon retains a deliberate quality, an environment that interacts with human perception in ways both subtle and profound. Despite repeated attempts to quantify or explain the effect, no consistent scientific account has emerged. Blue John Canyon continues to elude definitive understanding, its quiet zones appearing without a predictable pattern, influenced by factors too complex to be fully measured. Acoustic theory, meteorology, geology, and human perception intersect here, creating a phenomenon that is both real and mystifying, leaving observers suspended between observation and uncertainty. Each encounter reinforces the sense that the canyon controls not just movement, but the very atmosphere of sound within its walls. Those who emerge from Blue John Canyon carry the experience with them, an imprint of sound withheld and restored, a reminder of the limits of perception in spaces shaped by ancient geological forces. Even long after leaving the slot, visitors reflect on how the canyon seemed to manipulate air, stone, and expectation simultaneously. The quiet lingers in memory, an anomaly that resists rational explanation and leaves an enduring impression that some natural spaces operate beyond human comprehension. Blue John Canyon maintains its inexplicable quiet as though it were a conscious presence, swallowing every echo and leaving those who enter with the inescapable sense that some forces in the landscape operate beyond observational control. The driftwood puzzle of Waimea Canyon. A massive log, worn smooth by ocean tides and sun-bleached to a pale, ghostly hue, rests improbably on a narrow ledge deep within Waimea Canyon. The canyon, often called the Grand Canyon of the Pacific, stretches across Kauai in a labyrinth of ridges, valleys, and sheer cliffs, yet no stream or flood path seems capable of carrying such driftwood so far inland. The first hikers who stumbled upon these enormous, water-carved timbers were struck not only by their size but by the mystery of their origin, as though some invisible hand had transported them from distant seas and left them scattered on the canyon floor. Historical surveys of Waimea Canyon provide little guidance for understanding these findings. Early Hawaiian explorers mapped streams and gullies, noting that flash floods could sweep debris through narrow channels, but none of the known tributaries could account for logs appearing miles from any water source. Local accounts occasionally hint at catastrophic rainfall or sudden landslides, yet these natural events, though destructive, seem insufficient to explain why the largest driftwood pieces are found in areas entirely disconnected from present waterways. Geologically, the canyon is a product of millennia of volcanic activity and erosional forces. Its walls are layered with basalt and volcanic ash, and seasonal rainfall carves ephemeral streams that can swell into torrents. Yet the canyon's complex topography makes the movement of large objects unpredictable. Ledges jut sharply, ravines bend unexpectedly, and valleys narrow and widen in ways that would typically halt any object travelling under the force of water. The presence of driftwood in locations inaccessible to floodwaters challenges conventional understanding of the canyon's hydrology and geomorphology. Oceanic and ecological analysis offers further intrigue. Many of the driftwood logs originate from coastal trees, including ironwood, koa, and kukui, species not native to the high canyon environment. Their condition, rounded edges, absence of bark, and salt residue, indicates long exposure to seawater. Storm surges, tsunamis, and high surf along Kauai's coast could easily lift such trees into rivers, yet transporting them several miles inland over ridges and cliffs is far less plausible. The combination of oceanic origin and canyon placement renders the phenomenon almost inexplicable, as if the logs defy gravity and distance. Analysis of the logs has uncovered traces of marine life, including barnacle imprints and salt crystals, suggesting some may have drifted for months or even years before reaching the canyon. Careful analysis shows that a few logs carry scratches and abrasion patterns consistent with long-distance travel along rocky shorelines or through turbulent river mouths, suggesting exposure to multiple environments before settling in the canyon. These biological and physical markers provide rare clues to their journey, yet they also deepen the mystery, as no known combination of ocean currents, river paths, or flash floods could account for the most remote placements. Even the logs that appear freshly displaced show signs of exposure to coastal conditions, implying a sequence of events that defies ordinary hydrological or geological reasoning. Documented encounters with the driftwood reveal a pattern that deepens the mystery. Hikers and scientists have recorded large timbers appearing in clusters along remote ridges, often in spots that require strenuous climbing or navigation of steep inclines. Field notes describe logs wedged in narrow gullies, balanced precariously on rock formations, and even partially buried under sediment from minor landslides. These occurrences are irregular enough to elude a simple explanation, yet consistent enough across decades to suggest an underlying force, natural or otherwise, at work. Local folklore provides another lens through which the phenomenon is understood. Hawaiian oral histories speak of the canoes of the gods, driftwood carried inland by supernatural waves or as markers of past oceanic events. Elders tell of trees arriving where no stream could reach, viewed as omens or messages from ancestors. While such interpretations cannot be scientifically verified, they underscore a persistent awareness among island communities that Waimea Canyon is a place where natural rules occasionally yield to something larger, something that confounds human expectation. Scientific hypotheses attempt to reconcile the anomaly. Hydrologists have examined historical rainfall records, simulating flash floods capable of transporting debris. Tsunami models suggest that coastal surges could deposit driftwood at the canyon's mouth, but reaching the remote interior locations requires improbable secondary events, such as landslides or subsequent floods. Researchers have also considered wind-driven transport during storms, though the size and weight of some logs challenge any purely aerodynamic explanation. Even the most detailed models fail to fully explain the presence and positioning of the largest pieces. The human experience of encountering driftwood in Waimea Canyon adds a layer of suspense and wonder. Hikers speak of stepping around enormous timbers in near-impossible locations, pausing to measure their size against human scale and wondering what sequence of natural forces could have carried them there. The presence of logs in high, isolated areas evokes an almost surreal feeling, as if the ocean itself has reached inland through secret channels, leaving relics of its passage as silent, enigmatic evidence. Each encounter prompts reflection on the scale of natural processes and the enduring unpredictability of the landscape. The meeting of oceanic and terrestrial forces within the canyon provides a subtle record of time's flow. Some logs are heavily weathered, suggesting they have rested for decades, perhaps surviving multiple rainy seasons and minor landslides, while others appear more recent, freshly displaced by storm or flood. This combination of old and new creates an ongoing puzzle. The canyon continuously receives debris from distant sources, yet the exact pathways and mechanisms remain elusive. Every finding raises new questions about the history of the land and the reach of its natural forces. An extensive study has yet to produce a single theory that fully explains the phenomenon. Waimea Canyon preserves the logs in their improbable placements, marking them against red cliffs and green ridges, a testament to forces that are partially understood yet remain awe-inspiring in their unpredictability. The driftwood's presence bridges the ocean and the highlands, blending geology, ecology, and human observation into a phenomenon that defies easy categorization. Visitors and scientists alike are left to ponder whether these objects are the product of extraordinary natural events, overlooked hydrological processes, or some combination that humans have yet to fully comprehend. The driftwood scattered across Waimea Canyon stands as a silent testament to forces that traverse sea and land alike, leaving questions that reach farther than any footpath or streambed can follow. The Red Gorge Lantern Legend. Early records of Red Gorge make fleeting reference to a mysterious light, an anomaly that first appears in surveyor journals from the late 19th century. Mapmakers and explorers noted unusual illumination along the canyon walls, often describing it as a soft amber glow drifting where no torch could reach. These mentions were brief, buried among observations of the canyon's geological formations, but they established the lantern not as a sudden occurrence, but as a phenomenon observed over time. Even the earliest maps, sketched with painstaking accuracy, sometimes include cryptic annotations about glimmers or reflections seen in narrow clefts, suggesting that those who charted the gorge were aware of something that defied straightforward explanation. By the early 20th century, local guides and settlers began recording their own accounts, preserving the lights in oral stories and letters. Several diaries describe evenings when the canyon seemed to shimmer with a wandering glow, appearing first at the eastern rim and vanishing behind distant spires. These observers noted that the light's movement was unlike fire carried by wind. It did not flicker randomly or deviate with gusts, but flowed along particular routes, climbing and dipping in alignment with the canyon's natural channels. Factual details about weather conditions, moon phases, and the time of year were often included, implying that even casual observers recognized the consistency of its appearance. Cartographic surveys from the 1920s further attest to the lantern's presence. Surveyors charting Red Gorge's ridges and alcoves sometimes marked points with an unusual symbol, a small circle annotated with the phrase "wandering light." These entries suggest that the phenomenon had gained a measure of recognition, meriting notation on maps meant to guide future explorers. The canyon's narrow walls, rising hundreds of feet above the riverbed, created shadowed passages and hidden alcoves which may have influenced the perception of the light, but the historical records consistently describe a glow that seemed to navigate the terrain on its own terms. Historical accounts are complemented by missionary records and ethnographic notes collected from the region's Hawaiian inhabitants. These documents often interpret the wandering light through the lens of local legend, associating it with spirits or ancestral guides. One account describes a lantern-like apparition appearing during nights of heavy mist, said to guide or warn travellers along treacherous paths. While these cultural interpretations differ from the measured observations of surveyors, they add depth to the phenomenon's continuity across time, showing that the lantern has been observed, noted, and explained in multiple ways for well over a century. By mid-century, scientific interest began to emerge. Researchers examining the canyon's microclimate noted how temperature inversions and humidity layers could refract distant light sources, creating illusions of movement within narrow crevices. Atmospheric optics might account for some reports, yet the historical continuity of sightings and the specificity with which observers describe the light's elevation, speed, and path remains difficult to reconcile with natural explanations alone. Archival photographs from the 1940s show faint glimmers in long-exposure images, although contemporary analysis suggests these could be distant fires or reflection artifacts, leaving room for doubt and ongoing debate. Patterns within the historical record reveal remarkable consistency. The lantern is frequently reported along the northern reaches of the gorge, near the confluence of two ridgelines, appearing most often in late spring and early summer evenings. Even when described by different observers decades apart, the light's trajectory seems similar. It rises gradually along the cliffs before dipping into shadowed recesses, rarely seen in open, sunlit areas. These recurring features suggest that the canyon's configuration, combined with atmospheric or optical effects, may channel the phenomenon along specific paths. Yet the repeated documentation defies a purely accidental explanation, implying that the Red Gorge Lantern is something that interacts with the canyon in ways humans cannot fully predict. Additional archival notes mention the psychological effects on those who witnessed the light. Surveyors and explorers often described a sense of unease, as if the canyon itself were observing them. Some letters recount attempts to follow the glow, only to find it slipping beyond view, eluding every effort to catch it in the open. This layering of human experience, perception, and memory contributes to the legend's endurance, showing that even factual records cannot separate the observer from the observed. The light, documented in maps and journals, becomes a point where environmental phenomena and human interpretation intersect. Modern historians and folklorists have examined the collected accounts, seeking to reconcile the centuries of documentation with plausible explanations. Some suggest the light could be a combination of faint bioluminescence in canyon flora, distant campfires, or the interplay of mist and moonlight. Others note that cultural memory amplifies minor visual effects into a persistent legend, reinforcing itself through storytelling. Yet no single explanation accounts for the remarkable uniformity of the observations across decades, nor for the light's apparent avoidance of areas where physical explanations should dominate. Even today, Red Gorge maintains this curious balance between documentation and mystery. Hikers consulting archival notes or historical surveys may seek the lantern as part of a broader exploration of the canyon, yet many report seeing only the shifting shadows, the interplay of evening fog, and the occasional glint of sunlight on wet stone. The historical records endure, however, preserving each mention of the wandering glow and allowing it to exist as both a natural phenomenon and a thread of human history. The canyon itself, while unchanged in its geological structure, has become a repository for observation, memory, and legend. Through generations, the Red Gorge Lantern has persisted not merely as a fleeting light, but as a symbol of the canyon's capacity to confound, inspire, and endure. Each journal entry, survey notation, and ethnographic record acts as a marker of its presence, bridging the gap between factual observation and enduring mystery. Scholars and locals alike continue to puzzle over it, knowing that every documented sighting strengthens the legend even as it resists explanation. The wandering glow of Red Gorge has been recorded, interpreted, and speculated upon for more than a century, and yet its true nature remains as elusive as the canyon's shadowed corridors where no human has ever fully followed.